So I guess I'll start by introducing myself more thoroughly, and that will lead into an evolution of thought process. So, my name's Eliza Greenman, and I'm originally from Virginia, and I have a degree in forestry, and so after I finished up school in forestry, I just was in total need of finding which branch of forestry I wanted to go into. There's urban forestry, there's the toilet paper industry / paper industry, southern plantation monoculture. There's all sorts of different kinds. And I kind of, in college had just exposed me to all these different kinds, like non-timber forest products, like medicinal herbs, fruits, nuts that are produced in the forest. And so anyway, I ended up working in California first, where I was doing just inventory, and that was it, basically. I was going to very far away places, very remote places, and doing inventories. But in my time off...
Of trees.
Of trees. Yeah, forest... Well, sometimes it was just lava flows that didn't have any trees, because they all burned down. But in my time off, so I had this interesting schedule of I would work 10 or 15 days on, and then I'd have 10 days off, which is kind of my schedule of choice these days, if I can do it. But so I was befriended by a woman who was managing forest on the coast of California, North Coast, and she sort of took me under her wing for my 10 days off, every month. And so I'd work with her, and that turned into how to raise pot in a redwood forest, because that was the main cash driver there. It still is. And that's what people wanted. That's what they wanted to manage their forest for, essentially, was high quality redwood and high quality marijuana. And so right off the bat, in my forestry career, I started to see the forest as non-timber, for the most part. It's always, timber aspects always interest me, the idea of saw logs and, or firewood, or, artisan, tie a tree down and let it grow for 5 years, and then you have this beautiful bending wood, natural grain, stuff like that. That's always interested me. But really, when she took me, and I'm going to leave her now I'm being videotaped, I'm not going to mention her name. But when she took me under her wing, it was just whoa, this has so much more potential for it just sparked my interest, really. And so then I ended up, after that, I left Northern California because it was just too expensive. I would had to have permanently gotten into basically the marijuana business in order to continue living there. And I had some really creepy interactions with some people. One time my car got bulldozed in. They bulldozed berms of soil around my car, and I couldn't leave.
Around but not over.
Around but not over. I was completely barricaded in by soil. And that was pretty much the straw that broke the camel's back. Of nope, this is too sketchy. All I'm trying to do is grow things, or help grow things. Nope. So I took a job in Louisiana.
So who was the bulldozing?
A private landowner who, I wasn't even on his land, but he knew I was around, and so...
And what was it about what you were doing that he didn't like?
He had some growing operation that he didn't want me to see. I'm
Okay.
almost positive.
Yeah.
So, which is the case in all of California, is that there are growing operations happening in all the national forests. They just, once they're found, they're shut down. But it's really scary if you stumble on it. But this is a little bit beside the point. So, I moved to Louisiana, where I started doing research for Louisiana State University in bottomland hardwood forests. And that was there that I started to see, the just huge diversity of tree species and plant species comparatively to California, and even compared to here, where just 6 inches in elevation turned you into a different forest cover, and then another foot, and you were in a completely different forest cover after that. So I started to see, like, I started to look for all the nuts and look for all the fruits and see that they were, at different, like 1 foot in elevation, and I had persimmons, 1.5 foot and I had hickories. And so my whole view of forestry really started to move away from from timber products into fruits and nuts and herbs and that side of things. And so, but I hadn't fully realized this. I guess I hadn't fully latched on to it, and so it took me a couple more years to travel, and like I got a Fulbright to go to Germany, where I studied community forestry there, which is an amazing concept, because all their forests are manicured ridiculously well. Well, just they're manicured. I wouldn't say it's well.
But like every stick of kindling is used.
Oh yeah, I mean they sweep the forest. You want to talk about not having any leaf litter on the forest floor? Go to Germany.
They're still using it for animal bedding.
Oh yep, they are. And this
they were then at least.
I was in the southern range of the Black Forest, and so, and just the fact that the community, like the surrounding community, was so engaged in the forest. Like it was no longer a scary place. Like a lot of people, forests tend to be scary places for people. And I think just the term Black Forest probably originates from some scary. You might know. I don't know.
They're probably not in there after dark. Those people.
Right, right. But they have like great trails and little kid trails like with gnomes everywhere, and saying the gnomes have little signs, and it was all very interactive and beautiful. But at the same time, there are these vibrant farmers markets right outside, of these forests and these, downtown centers that just move me way more towards like this love and responsibility of food.
And yet, what Mashachik said in the Austrian book is, the whole towns would rake the leaves, and it was fine for the forest. They didn't have acid rain and snow either. Mm-hmm. And the leaves trickled down during the winter, and then they raked them in the spring. But that all that animal bedding was subsidizing the open land crops.
Yeah.
And the animals were being fed leaves too, so everything leaf was coming from the soil and going to those crops and making them that vibrant.
Right, and the big thing with this too is that, so Germany is a small country with a lot of people, and so they have these small plots of land, like families have small plots of land that they grow on. So it's all way more doable to rake out your share of leaves and bring them to your garden plots, because, it's like an eighth of an acre, or it's just, the scale is...
The scale is human scale,
right,
instead of huge tractor scale.
Right, and they do have more so of like it's not just like one farm at this, that's manning one table. It's like a guy that's representing this neighborhood, of people selling what they have, which is like incredible plums and, just everything. They're just more fruit culture anyway over there. Like Mirabella plums were dripping from parks, and grapevines were growing on the side of buildings, and it's just like fruit was
and
everywhere.
And people were actually picking them, unlike the grapevines that are climbing everywhere.
Right, they're actually like cultivars, like these were planned into the landscape. Yeah. And so that's when I came to Maine directly after that for the first time, and I stayed for 6 years, and that's when I totally just like was in this. Okay, well, my background's in trees. I'm really interested in sort of food sovereignty and, responsibility of like our agricultural system. Yeah, and so then it was just like, okay, well, fruit trees it is. Like fruit and nut trees are like where it's going to be for me, because it's like this whole integration. So, with that said, I'm really into apples. That's my instant passion. It hit me like a ton of bricks, and it stuck with me ever since. So, I'm not an I hate the word expert. I'm not an expert, because there's like so much to know. There's so very much to know. but it is my, like...
You're a student.
I'm a permanent student. It's like what I do. It's like my default activity. It's what I think about all the time. It's what I love. So, with that said, let's talk about agroforestry. So I messed around in orchards in Maine for a few years. Like, I worked for old men, I apprenticed for old men. Everybody in the apple world is old and man, generally. And so I started to see, like, these commonalities of thought that just didn't jive with me. Like, you know, these people were growing heirloom apples, but they were at the same time telling me, oh, they won't sell because nobody wants to buy ugly apples. But they were only ugly because of their genetics. Like, they were russeted, so they looked like a potato. Or they had bumps. And that was like their genetic predisposition, was to be bumpy.
No,
you know?
this and that.
Yeah. And
No,
so, and they would, like, spray things to try and change that. And it's like, no. I mean, it's just like us trying to change somebody else because they have freckles, and we were like, you know what, you should bleach your skin. Like, you know, it's the same deal. And so I started to stray from that and try and find different markets and different outlets for, rather than, so you tell me this fruit can't be sold because it's ugly.
I'll show you that I can sell it.
I'm going to show you I can sell it. So right around that time, like, was the beginning of the hard cider boom. So that was really serendipitous for me. I moved right into hard cider as, like,
that's why it happened right
somebody who knew something about these apples that everybody was looking for hard cider. So it was just a really nice transition for me, which might have happened too soon. But because I only knew what I knew, but it was a lot more than what other people in the cider industry knew.
Just Brian with tree butter.
Yeah, and so then I started to think, well, so I moved towards, like, value added fruit production. It was just like, screw growing fruit for dessert quality. Like, if people want to buy it down the road and they want to buy my ugly fruit, go for it, you know, like, but they're going to have, that's not going to be my primary objective. My primary objective is value added. So I have a few moments in my life where, a few things that have happened in my life that have, like, sort of shaped my road to agroforestry. And it's all sort of centered around apple orchard. But the first one really happened when I went to Central Asia. So in 2013, maybe 2012.
I remember that. I knew you then.
Yeah, you knew me then. I went to Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan, but mostly Kyrgyzstan, which is the genetic homeland of apples, but it's also the genetic homeland of 70% of temperate fruit species in the world. So you go there, and it's like Eden, you know. Where I was, at about a mile high, there were wild forests of Carpathian walnut and apple and hawthorn and cherry plum and this black locust that had red pods, and roses, you know, were basically like the common forest type there. And roses on the, cherry plums and roses on the outside, but like all the others on the inside kind of thing. And you go up 1,000 more feet and you hit pure pear forest stands. And you go down 1,000 feet and you're hitting pistachios and almonds and apricots and
hello, is anyone looking for us?
Pomegranates, and just like, it was insane. Like the sidewalks, I got there right after apricot season, and the sidewalks were just covered in apricot pits. You know, and like, talking to a beekeeper there, they extract the honey out of their hives 6 times a year. Like, 6 times a year, you know? So it was just a really vibrant place, but the main thing I kept seeing when I was looking around, like, traveling through all these native forest types, fruit forest types was these apples are flawless. These nuts are flawless. You know, everything I'm seeing here is totally flawless. And why is that? Like, no cosmetic disease, no bugs in the fruits, but bugs were around, you know. And so I spent a lot of time trying to study that and basically trying to find the right people I also had to find the right translator to switch over from like tourism English to like horticultural English, you like farmer speak. But once I did that, because they speak Uzbek in southern Kyrgyzstan, once I did that, it was great. So basically 400. They've been managing these fruit and nut forests for 400 years, at least, is what they could tell me. And they've been doing so.
Longer than that, but that's how far back they
That's how far back they're able to tell me. You know, they have like local records, like written down.
Until they started writing it down.
Right, of yields and such. But so it's a totally it's a formerly nomadic population that sort of in certain areas sort of settled at certain times. And so where I was in Arslanbab, it had been around 400 years that actually people had just kind of like, oh, this is nice, let's stay here. But still in Kyrgyzstan there are nomadic places. It's just when you hit these fruit forests that are so rich in food, there's no real reason to move anymore. So,
how did you pick that area to go to? How did you know that was a good spot to go?
Oh, I did a lot of research, and I talked to a couple of the people who had been to Kazakhstan, and I got them to give me their guide's contact information and like the university contact information. Who then I was like, give me a map of where all these forests are, and so Kazakhstan is the oldest in genetics, but there's an isolated population of equally as old genetics in Arslanbab, Kyrgyzstan.
And walnuts?
Yeah, so that's why I went there. So what I started to learn was, these people haven't just been like people in an orchard, in this forest, like cleaning up the fruit and managing and, whatever. This has been in collaboration with animals the whole time.
Cows.
Yeah, so cows and sheep and some goats. So
who started it?
Who started it all?
Goats.
So these were
Not
wild.
the people.
These were like, as I started to refer to them as like wild orchards, like in relationships with humans. And so I would ask questions like, tell me about your milk, tell me about your meat, tell me about what you do to get this fruit, get this milk and get this meat, and what are your inputs? And they were like, what do you mean what are our inputs? Like, we move them around the different plots that we lease in these orchards. Sometimes they go up to the hill and they eat grass.
Did they have fencing to move them around?
Or
a person?
It's like hawthorn wattle fencing.
Hedges. Yeah.
Yeah. And so they didn't have inputs. Like, they didn't have, other than just like grazing them from stand to stand, like they didn't have inputs, but they were telling me, I was like, so in the United States, a lot of people use wormers, like garlic or whatever, and they're like, oh, well, I'm pretty sure that's what the walnut does, because they're grazing underneath these like apple walnut forests.
One of the things I use.
Yeah.
Use here for worms.
Right, and then I was like, in your apples, they don't have any blemishes. They have no insects, and they're like, oh, that's because the animals eat them. The animals eat the ones that drop that are full of insects. It's like, of course, because that's what happens.
Cleaning up.
Trees drop infected fruit.
To feed animals.
Right. And I was like, well, what do you do for, fertilization of trees? And they're like, animal poop? and so it became this giant circle, of, oh my God, this is like a closed loop system here of people and a forest and animals and
And they all looked the happiest that they could be.
Yeah, and they were all loved, and, you know, it was like a very, because they needed them, because this is a poor area.
You're
They're
right.
very, very rich in what they had and resources surrounding them. But ultimately, like, you know, it cost me $7 a day to have a full-time translator. Like, it cost me $5 a day to feed myself and stay.
But they didn't need those dollars too badly.
No, and in the fall they have a walnut currency, like, which is crazy to think about. Like a lot of, walnuts are currency. And so, they're just pretty isolated. And in a way it was like, I thought of it as like a utopian society kind of like, you know, where resources are like perennial fruit trees and nut trees. But also like the women did almost all the work. You know, so I always have to add that in, like, in like
what
the
was
most
the work?
Oh, all the farm work. You know, they did all, like,
But what was there to do? Moving the animals.
Moving the animals, milking the animals.
Okay.
You know,
slaughtering,
butchering. The men basically did the hay, which was a combination of leaf hay, but also they had like glacier irrigated fields that grew grains, like old grains. You know.
So did the men do the grains also?
And the men did the grains. So the men did everything that involved like big Soviet trucks, and then the women were.
And how were they cutting the grain in the?
They were doing it by hand.
With scythes or sickles?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. I'm gonna guess. I'm not sure what it was, because I only saw the, what is it called when you bunch them up into standing.
A stook of sheaves. A stook of sheaves.
A stook of sheaves. Yeah. So that's where I was. I was there when they were loading those into the truck to take to.
To thresh.
Yes.
Did they thresh with the machine? Or?
Yes, they threshed with a machine. Which was like an old Chinese threshing machine. Yeah, their threshing machines were, all their machinery was like single cylinder, you know, diesel, super efficient, can run for 3 days on a gallon kind of thing.
What was the scenario? I mean, because this sounds pretty good.
Yeah.
But then, like, the only thing, the piece that's always missing in any scenario like this is, like, what is the healthcare scene there? Did you get it?
Not that sick, though.
So, the healthcare scene is largely, like, non-Western medicine, too.
Uh-huh.
So, well, first of all, let me say, the biggest problem there right now is population. Because it's Muslim, everybody's having, you know, tons of kids, and they're running out of space. Like livable space.
For all those cows that all those people need.
Yeah,
too.
right. It's really,
and all those fruit trees that people need.
They're outgrowing they're outgrowing what their resources can support on a sustainable level. But the healthcare scene, it's not like, you know, listening to one of those Univision commercials of watching like naked girls running across the street that are impoverished, and you know, it's not like that at all. Like, everybody's really well fed, seemingly healthy, and like, you know, one of the things I got, inevitably, you're going to get some form of stomach problem when you're there, and I did, because I was just eating like thousands of apples, and so, the like local medicine man basically came in and visited me, and he gave me apple powder. He was like, this will help settle your stomach, you know. And I was like, no, you don't understand. Like, this is the reason why. This is the reason why I am the way I am.
Did you take it and it worked anyway?
It helped. It helped. Yeah. So
it was dried.
It was dried. Yep. And so, and it's all of that, like, you know, gathered plants.
Disease.
Yeah, they don't have any Western medicine, you know.
So cancer just kills people.
Yeah, cancer's just something that is, you know. There are plenty of old people there too. And they were beautiful people.
I'm guessing their cancer rate isn't probably as high as ours, though.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. Those are questions I didn't ask because I was so like fruit nut centric.
Yeah, we should stay on fruit nuts.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Curiosity.
But and that was the major thing is, every place I started to go in Kyrgyzstan, even these orchards that weren't wild, that were planted, you would see cattle in them. You would see like, they just were everywhere, and it was just a part. That's just how it was.
That's how the poop happened.
Yeah, and that is
what about
like
the people poop?
It was. They were like, I have no idea where it went, but it was just like
it was being used somewhere.
Pits. It was like not just pits that were basically like squat toilet, into a pit kind of thing. Rarely any plumbing.
Trees near them?
Yeah, but they were like cottonwood kind of trees,
Okay.
So, no, it seemed like they hadn't planned out where they were shitting, in terms of the. I don't know actually I don't know if they just dug a new one and they, finished that one, dug a new one.
Or they used to dig it under the trees and then someone said that's not clean and they started like doing this, which doesn't get it to the fruit trees anymore.
Yeah, because
Cause like in Peru, they still shit under their fruit trees purposefully.
Right. Which would be great.
In the Amazon, some places.
But no, that didn't seem to be an incorporated practice.
Yeah.
And that also might have been because it wasn't that far from the forest to the town center.
Right.
It was like a mile or something.
But that's too far to go poop.
Yeah.
Too.
Maybe they have regular schedules. I don't know. So yeah, this idea occurred to me in like 2012 that was, animals need to be in orchards. Like, this has been a thing, and it's not a thing here because, and I started.
It was a thing here.
It was a thing here. It's no longer a thing.
The sheep were in the orchards and the geese.
Right, and so that's been a whole.
The pigs at certain times.
That's been like a whole bunch of this journey of mine is just like learning about why it's disappeared and like what we used to have and what like in the UK they do still today, and they no longer, they're kind of like, and antiquity practices, like almost for aesthetics. It seems these days it's less for practical measures. But that started me on my own version of like agroforestry is animals in orchards. And I
remember when you went, I just want to say this, when you went to Kazakhstan and you came back and you're like, at first I was kind of like disappointed because here I am, this permaculture person with like all these different little species that we like to make in these guilds with our apple tree, but it's all plant species. And you came there and it was like so grazed, there really wasn't, there was grass under the apple trees and pasture plants.
Right.
And it was a little disappointing for your permaculturist self.
Yeah, and then I
to find that they weren't focused on guilds,
Totally.
Yeah, she snapped out of it.
Yeah, it was you're right. It was the total, like, curse of permaculture, on my eyes for, like, the first 2 weeks. I was expecting, like, these chaotic, like you said, guilds, of, like, all these beneficial plants and whatever.
Which the apple borers on the trunks just love, and the Colorado on the trunk just loves.
Right. But instead it was not. It was, like, this has been a relationship in the making for hundreds of years. Like, that to me is what permaculture is. That is a permanent culture of people in orchards, rather than like how we sometimes get sucked into like wild planting, what comes up wild together, and that's certainly valuable. But if we're going to feed people, it might be good to start making relationships with those plants, and that's what cultivation is. That's what breeding is. That's what like
relationships.
Yeah, it's relationships. So yeah, I then came back to the States, and I was just like eyes open. I see the light. Like, I have to get animals into these cider orchards. And so that's where I am to this day, is incorporate. Right now I have pigs. And
some of them related to mine.
Yes, there are some of them. Well, they're all somewhat related to yours.
Oh, you don't have any of the
Yeah.
ones you brought in.
They all came from those two girls that you gave me. So, and yeah, I guess I can talk about that too. But so I've sort of laid this baseline of, for me, like in this talk, a lot of it's going to be agroforestry and animals in orchards as a form of agroforestry. But I want to stop real quick because I have to pee. But also I want to see, like, you know, where do you guys want to go with this talk? Because I could talk for hours and hours and hours
about mulberries, about chinkapins,
about everything.
Pawpaws.
And I'll just give I can give overviews of things that I'm excited about. But I'm interested in, like, you know, what do you want to learn? What do you want to have a discussion about? Like, you know, things like that.
The wilderness that did exist around these areas, like, were they populated by, like, keystone predators, as they kind of aren't, like, here? Like, do they still have, like, that?
So they say that bears are responsible for a lot of the seeding of these areas. But it's hard to tell. This is the Silk Road. You know, this is, like, one of the centrums of the Silk Road.
Yeah.
So it's really hard to say, but in terms of keystone predators, like, I think bears are the only ones I heard talked about, essentially.
Also, what about, like, it sounds like they're very, like, decentralized. So, like, could you just, like, elaborate on, like, how the culture kind of, like, does the culture centralize in any way? Like,
well, they weren't, so they are, right now they're a relic of the Iron Curtain. So they were, you know, under Soviet rule. And so what happened, and so when I was there, it's just like the aftermath of what happens when you're under Soviet rule, which was everything was gridded out. All these forests were turned into grids. Each square in that grid was leased out, kind of thing.
And who was receiving the lease?
It was whoever, you know.
The
The government leased out the plots.
Okay.
And so to say they were decentralized, they're sort of recovering from centralization, essentially, like Soviet rule. Like, so, like they stopped speaking Russian, you know. They, like, made it a point, everybody in that community, like, reverted back to Uzbek. And, like, the kids only speak Uzbek now, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah, nowadays, it's sort of like what happens when a regime falls, you know, I guess, and they're just, like, still in this transitional mode, but I wasn't in the thick of politics there, you know, to know, like, how...
Still very interesting.
Yeah, how things worked exactly.
We should let you go pee.
Yeah, please. I like keep crossing my legs a little bit more.
Camera off for a second.
And then we'll get into
And I didn't ask my questions, but I'm really interested in you know, anything with the leaves that you have to say, and any of your ideas of plantation that you haven't really tried yet.
Okay. Yeah.
But
I'll get into
as
that.
far as for leaves as well as fruit and nuts.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so in terms of land leases in Kyrgyzstan, it's money nowadays that they pay with. I mean, they're not fully off the money system, and I think they're actually heading more towards a money system rather than, you know, walnut system.
Yeah.
But so how do they make that money is not really on tourism, that's for sure.
Yeah.
I was like the first white American woman they'd ever seen. You know, or like white English speaking woman they'd ever seen. Which makes you a bit of a celebrity when that happens. It's kind of cool. But they...
Well, you were a good first one.
Right.
You gave us a good rap.
So the Swiss have come in to that area in terms of like Swiss NGO kind of deal, and trying to help them with more of a tourism industry. Like, this is a ski haven, where this, I mean, like,
Do they like to ski?
they're learning how to ski.
Oh, weird.
That's sort of, yeah, like this weird culture. Like, they were telling me in the wintertime, we just don't do anything.
And the Swiss
You know?
came for the fruit.
And
I
then
know
the
they
Swiss
did.
came, and they were like, no, guys, you're like, we're going to teach you how to ski, we're going to teach you how to mountain bike, we're going to teach you how to do all this stuff so that, like, people can come in. And they're all pretty excited about it, actually. Like, it's like a new form of income for them.
It strikes me just because I'm part Swiss, and like I've been to Switzerland, and they have a lot of fruit and nuts, and their culture and their diet is very fruit and nut based.
Yeah.
And dairy.
Right, so, it's like a
so
moth
they
to
definitely have
flame.
some things in common.
Yeah.
How long is their winter? Like, how long can they not really?
It's like from December through probably mid-March. That's my guess.
It's kind of short.
Yeah. Well, it's not that short. I mean, if I were to compare
It's a real
climates,
winter.
it would be like North Dakota or something, or maybe South Dakota, where you get, or maybe Nevada, like in the hills. I mean, it's high up, so but it's arid, and it does get cold for quite a bit of time. Yeah.
They use the wool off their sheep.
Do they use the
I
wool
said
off their
they
sheep?
do. I just said
Oh yeah,
they probably do.
absolutely.
They do.
Like one of
It
the
is cold there.
girls start working on their dowries at a very young age, and one of those are felted wool panels for yurts, for the yurts that they move into. Which, you know, by the time they're 15 and they get married off, they, you know, they have like these 3-foot panels that go 15, 20 feet that wrap in circles. It's the most beautiful thing.
Do they like roll them up?
Well, they don't have to move that much there.
Yeah, they don't have to move all that much. So some of the
that
places
big
do.
thing.
You know, it's like seasonal, like maybe 3 times a year or something. So yeah, all the product. I mean, everything has a use there, and in terms of current, you know, how they pay for things. I'm sure it's. I didn't ask like how much it was, and how doable that is.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty sure it's pretty doable because when the Soviets left, that grid
And those
system.
walnuts are worth things to the rest of the world too.
Yeah, and Russians buy a lot of the walnuts,
Mm.
and then from there, and Russians buy a lot of the fruit. Like Russians are like the main market.
That's why they took them into the Iron Curtain.
Right. But what was I? I had an idea. Anyway. Okay, and so then let's see here.
So you came back here and animals under the trees. Need to have animals under the trees somewhere.
Right. So I was working for the Laufers who are vegans when I came back, and it was like, this isn't gonna work.
When you left and when you came back.
Yeah, when I got back. You know,
And I did bring geese over there.
I gotta be somewhere I can have animals. So I moved. That's when I moved to Virginia. And so I'll talk to you right now about what
Which
I
is where
have.
she started. She grew up in Virginia.
Yeah, I grew up in Virginia. So I'll talk to you about what I have, and how I'm using
Maryland.
it.
Close.
Yeah.
Virginia.
So I have 2 pieces of property. Well, have as in I'm on 2 pieces of property. One is a small, like, 1/2 acre, maybe 3/4 acre orchard, overgrown orchard in the very tip top of Northern Virginia, in a place called Lovettsville. And it's been overgrown for basically the last 20 years. It's been abandoned. And so I've been involved in some orchard restoration aspects of it. Because it was an Asian family that owned it. And so they're all like Asian cultivars of apples. And then there's Asian pears. And then there's persimmon. There's like sort of Asian American persimmon hybrid orchard too. Friends of mine have the Asian pear, are in charge of the Asian pear orchard, and then I'm in the apple orchard and in the persimmon orchard.
And this is all. Would you say 3/4 of an acre?
No, well, my apple orchard is 3/4 of an acre.
Okay.
But the Asian pear orchard is probably 2 acres, and then the persimmon orchard, what's left of it, is like maybe 1/2 an acre, probably less than that. And so, and I have some pictures. One of my major things it's all about objectives, you know, and so I have American guinea hogs, which are not market hogs. Like, they take...
They're large and they're slow.
Yeah, they just take a
Not
lot
slow, but
of
they
time.
grow.
And so to me, the only way you could make American guinea hogs marketable is to have no inputs. You know, essentially, like all your inputs are just moving them under fruit areas and, you know, great grass pastures, and
Which is what they're good for.
which is what they're really good for, right?
Sorry, can you just define like slow? How?
Oh, slow growing.
18.
It's like-
no, I know slow growing.
it's like-
18 months to 250. Like what specifics
It's like
are slow?
18 months to 180, probably.
Okay.
If you're like trying to not get a fat cap that's like this thick.
Yeah.
And then probably 2 years to 220 to, I think that's what one of ours that we just slaughtered was 220.
And that's about where you max out.
Live weight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so they're small anyway, you know, and your markets have got to be high end. For to slaughter a 2-year-old hog, I mean, your markets have to be super high end.
Yeah.
And that makes me uncomfortable, like selling
Just to people
pork
who,
to
yeah.
just people,
It
selling
doesn't
the one
become part of the
percenters.
culture.
Right. Into restaurants that, you know, only serve, that people have to dress
That
up
only
to go
serve
to.
a $40 meal.
Yeah, it really bothers me, actually. And so I love the guinea hogs, and I'm always going to have some guinea hogs because of their impact on the land is far less than like, because I have a neighbor who has large blacks, and we've messed around with their large blacks in orchards, for example.
And they could turn the trees over, maybe even the
They
standards.
could if they well.
If there was a big worm under it.
Probably
Not.
maybe, but
It's a little rough.
it's I don't think that would happen. Maybe if it was like a super wet year and they weren't being fed anything, you know, and
Right.
all the grass was gone.
I'm sorry, I was interrupting.
But so for me, the guinea hogs in this, I'll just start by talking about this abandoned orchard. Like, I needed them, for starters, to come in and clear the understory, which was covered in poison ivy. And at the time, I had 5 guinea hogs that I moved into this orchard, and they were they were right at a year old, actually. So,
So half-sized.
like 100 pounds, a year old, which I really like that size, actually. I actually like, so, and I'll get into some of the disease components of how I'm managing with pigs, but like the 100-pound plus, to me, they seem to root less. They have like, they're like more aware of all the different plants they can eat, it seems. Like they've got like a taste memory of far more things. So they were eating everything, you know, everything under, even moonseed, which is poisonous, which some of the pigs were starting to look pretty thin. And I was like, oh God, it's moonseed. Like, you gotta get that out. You know, because they were essentially just poisoning themselves, you know, and losing weight. So I put 5 pigs in, and
Because you weren't feeding them, you were just letting them have the
yeah,
apples and what they could find.
right, and so they were. I have picture. I have.
But they were
picture.
still growing.
They were still growing. Let me pull this picture up. And pigs in orchard understory. Yeah. Make this big. Okay. So that's a before and after shot, essentially, of
Oh, wow.
the pigs sort of restoring some of this underground for me, just to make it like more accessible. But also, after that, I reseeded it into clover, and it did it rained. Actually, I waited for it to rain. I kept them in. They mucked it up, and then I reseeded it all into clover, just to try and reboot the orchard understory, because it had been abandoned. As you can tell in the overstory there, I mean, it's crazy. The trees are planted way too close. But that, in a way, was a blessing, because when it was like a closed canopy, and so further back in the orchard was soil and like moss. There were no weeds further back.
So it wasn't like you were contending with huge bushes.
Right, and in the front I was, in a way, because they were smaller trees. They were different rootstocks, and they were smaller. So that is 5 pigs in 2 weeks under that
In
one
how much
orchard
area?
row. It's
just
probably
an orchard row.
yeah, that orchard row. I did the entire orchard row. Let's see here. It's probably like 300 feet. And then by 25.
Yeah. So our pigs did that next to the road.
Mm-hmm.
Just the two parents who are well over a year now. One's 2 and one's 4. And, but in my pasture in earlier spring, Nosenia left real hummocks a couple years ago. Like where, there's some places that they'll flip the sod and the sod leaves gullies and lumps of sod over other sod, and you end up with this hidden mound.
So that's the New York orchard experiment I had when I first got the pigs. And so that was pigs
That was
age...
a little more hummocky too.
Yeah, that's pigs age, like a couple months, and...
Just little.
Little, yeah. I mean, maybe, let's see, they were born in May, June, July, August. Yeah. No more than 3 months old.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the difference of age, but it's also the difference of water. So that's another thing that's really important is pigs have way more of an effect on a landscape if it's wet.
And they also choose, if it's really dry, they choose not to root.
Right, they do.
They know about not making deserts, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And or they just, there's no worms there. So
right, I think that, you know how like if you bang on a piece of metal, worms come up to the surface when it's wet outside or when it's raining. If you cause that vibration, it's that vibration is the same vibration as like a drop of water hitting the ground.
Okay.
And so worms do come up to the surface when it rains because of the natural vibrations of like rain hitting the soil. And so that's another reason why they root like crazy when it's wet. It's because it's like a worm buffet, But
so I'm really curious, just because I'm trying to figure out how now to flatten those hummocks.
Mm-hmm.
And my soil guy was making guesses, but he doesn't have that much. I mean, he grew up with pigs, but he doesn't have. But he's like, we were thinking maybe we have to leave it them longer just to like finish rooting it and grind those sods back in again.
Right.
Versus leaving it so uneven.
So,
but we don't want it compacted either.
Yeah.
And it's like how to know when they're gonna like go in, because I put my pigs in the pasture because they want to eat grass like crazy, but then you turn your back 2 seconds and they might they start rooting some places, and it got where I was for a couple years I was moving them in paddocks fairly frequently, and they would graze a lot, but invariably sooner or later they would root something up. And so bit by bit over a couple years period I got like a lot of, like almost the whole place is pretty hummocky.
Yeah.
And it's not, and I thought, oh, that's an opportunity to seed things in, but it wasn't, because the low spots without the sod have nothing and they're kind of wet and anaerobic, and the spots with the sod already have roots in, and really the goldenrod just took off, which is the thing I didn't want.
Right.
So anyway, it's really hard to, like, so do you have any guidelines about what changes species in the direction you want, or, like, do you leave them in until they really kill it? So that you can change the species more easily?
No, I don't know if I have. I might have to pass around a photo on my cell phone.
What do you need?
I have a photo that I wanted to show you guys, but it's not on my computer. Okay. So this is the thing. This is what you've said is like, I think one of the hardest things.
If you email it, we can show it on your computer. You email it to yourself.
Right. It's one of the hardest things to work around with pigs is, the aftermath of them on a landscape when they're not just eating grass.
Right. And we haven't figured out the snap in, snap out nose ring yet.
Right.
Because the nose ring is for just grazing.
Right.
Yeah, I was going to ask you what your thoughts on ringing pigs was.
Have you ever had a ringed pig?
I haven't had a ringed pig. And there are that ethical battle, because that's like their number one tool.
Yeah.
Is their nose. And I think that makes them happy, but,
and it's handy when we want a garden flipped.
Right. So, but no matter what.
Or rock gotten out.
I mean, I think no matter what, pigs are going to root. Like, you can.
I've always heard that the rings really work, that they do not root with a ring in their nose.
Yeah, and maybe that's the way to go. I haven't gone that route. Right now, and what we're doing is a couple different things. So, like, in the wintertime, we have hay. We cut hay. And that's what we feed them, a large amount of hay and whey. We basically whey and hay in the wintertime. And
whose way? Do you have someone
cheese,
else's doing?
goat cheese maker down the road way. That I get like a 55-gallon barrel once a month, and so we just end up soaking the hay in the way and give it to them. But what that's doing is, because we also give them some extra straw for bedding and whatnot in the
So
winter.
in the
This is
winter, they're
winter
pretty
time.
much living on the calories of the way and the roughage of the hay.
Yeah, pretty much. Sometimes we give them a little grain if it's going to be really cold out. We give them some grain.
But it's not regular.
Yeah, we had a couple nights. We had like 2 weeks that were maybe in the teens, and so it was mostly the little pigs that needed the calories. The big pigs were
And are
just
they
like,
still out on land at that time?
yeah, we've got them out all year round.
Yeah, me too.
And so in the hay and straw scenario, what that actually did was that started to fill in all of the hummocks, with their poo and pee. It was just like kind of deep bedding. It became, because we reduced their paddock size, and then we would move them because we were trying not to move them over the same spot over the same spot in a calendar year, and that's just for parasite load. We're in the Mid-Atlantic, it's very it's very comparable to
So my
parasites.
pigs, I have tested, and they don't seem to pick them back up.
Yeah.
And I've rotated them back, but not. Maybe not for a year or so, or maybe
Right, we're
less,
just
but not immediately.
being super cautious because
Yeah.
I've heard
But they haven't
friends of mine
gotten them back
say,
again.
pasture pig friends of mine have said 2 months is basically what you know.
Right, if they have
your minimum.
parasites.
Yeah.
But when you got my piglets, there were no parasites in
No,
those.
No, and
And
when
so they can
when
pick 'em
we
up from
butchered
dogs or
one and I
cats.
squeezed out all their intestines,
And saw nobody
there's nothing.
home.
Yeah. But so that's the winter thing we've been doing is sort of building soil with the pigs.
And with someone else's, or you're haying.
With our
Your
hay.
hay.
Yeah, hay from pasture,
Uh-huh.
so. Because we have a lot of land. And to answer your question, I'm on, in Maryland, basically central on the border of Virginia, Maryland. I'm on a 900-acre farm. But 200 acres of that are pasture. And so there's a hay operation, essentially. And we're working to change the way the hay works there, because it's less and less quality hay every year, because they're just not. The guy that's making the guy in charge of the hay is 85 years old, and he just
Can't do it anymore.
isn't
Can't find manure.
really putting in the effort. So
To find the surplus.
and so, but what we're running the pigs on is far less than that, of course. I'm leasing a 70-acre piece, but it's that's like most of that's not being used right now. So probably we have 13 pigs, and they're probably on they've probably been on no more than 7 acres this year.
And is that,
Winter and through now.
so you have fruit trees in Virginia, but do you have fruit trees also in Maryland?
In a way, I do. But this is a new spot. So this is sort of a planning spot for me, where I've been collecting a lot of genetics to plant out and to graft onto existing. And I can get into that in a minute. But to finish off with
So these two spots are how far apart from each other?
10 miles.
Okay. I mean, they're different states.
Different
So
states.
I
but
wanted
just
to have a
10
picture
miles.
in my mind of
Yeah,
like
I have
how
to
often
cross-
you can get back and forth.
I have to cross the Potomac River, and then I'm basically there. So that's to address the winter time. It's just kind of deep bedding that does seem to fill out, those pockmarks of the pigs. But the other thing we're doing is mechanical now. Is we're going over it with a chain harrow. So basically dragging, a chain link fence kind of thing behind us after the pigs are in, to go ahead and grade
level
it.
it back off again.
Yep. And
Some people do it with a lot of chickens.
yeah, you could do it with a lot of chickens, but
You have to feed all those chickens.
right. I just don't have time for chickens right now.
Right. You have to do someone,
So
someone
it's-
else's operation.
Yeah,
cleaning
if
up
somebody
after
wanted to
your
have
operation.
broilers or whatever and run them, but also like, a lot of people like chicken tractors and whatnot, but chicken tractors are kind of meant for flat ground.
Oh yes, you
And
can't
so-
move them on that ground. You'd have to
Yeah.
have a big fence and a lot of chickens at once and then
Right.
slaughter them all.
Right, and so I
Move
have,
on.
and we don't really have any flat ground. It's all sort of
Yeah, no.
gently rolling.
Even to begin with.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
my place isn't very flat either.
so we're going over it with a chain harrow and then reseeding behind it.
Even
and-
a chain harrow wants it fairly flat.
Yeah. So we reseed behind it into, you know, clover and whatever cover we want them to eat or, you know,
Mhm.
want to work with to improve the soil. One interesting thing I've been doing
And
this
when
year,
does that happen for you? Because like here, like a
When
lot of
it's-
years I've reseeded just a little too late and it gets too dry and it never germinates. And so you have to get
Really,
the
I
kids out
just-
of there in time to reseed.
Yeah, it's just watching the weather for me. Like,
Yeah.
Like you have like impending doom weather, winter weather that comes. For me, it's like, oh, I can plant covers until
Oh, you
January.
have a lot of places. Yeah.
You know, like,
Right.
and then I
Okay,
can
that's
seed them
clarifying.
again in March. You know, so I only have kind of 2 months that are off limits.
Yeah, we reseed them too early, and if it starts moistening up, then the seed might freeze.
Yeah, and so for me, it's just watching the weather because we get a lot of rain, so it's
Yep,
really
not hard to do.
Yeah, it's not hard to. Our cycles
Get it
happen
to
a lot
tape.
faster. But what I've been doing recently is we have a fixed stand of false indigo, which is a native nitrogen fixer shrub. It's probably at its tallest, like 8 feet tall, maybe at its tallest.
And it
It's-
does die.
And it dies, and I love it.
I'm sure.
Because I might not find a picture of it. But just imagine.
Is it a little lamb's quartery looking? I can't remember.
No, it looks like black locust kind of. Little black locust, like scrawny stems of black locust coming up.
But it's not perennial.
It's perennial.
Down
Yeah.
there?
Down there it's perennial.
Might be a different plant, too.
Yeah. So, we've been running the pigs so heat is another factor. Like, the pigs don't want to be hot, just like we don't want to be hot. They love shade, and they're more productive in shade. Like,
Mud.
if you have them,
They have a bath.
they
But
make
even then
their
they're
own
not
bath.
productive, they'll just lay in it.
They make their own bath out of the water container,
Right.
which and it becomes more so a pool if they're in like an open environment. Which actually I don't want, because that's like that's just like pig body after pig body slamming themselves into the ground trying to get into the water, which is just the definition of compaction.
Right.
You
In
know,
that spot.
and you have to have. I have a I have a designated spot per paddock now for that to happen.
Right.
Essentially.
Of course.
But I'm noticing in the false indigo, is that it provides a dappled shade, so they're in there all day, and they're just eating the grass in between. And if they knock it over, whatever, it's a nitrogen fixer. Like it's just.
So it's a good cover crop if they do turn it under.
It's great, like. If anything, if the pigs are leaving a negative impact on the area.
So it has a lot of similarities to locust. So it's not the same plant that we grew for false indigo here.
No, I mean it's very similar to locust to me.
Because here it's an annual.
Yeah, I don't think it fixes as much nitrogen as black locust, but it's a perennial variety. But I like it because you can mow it easy, so you can just mow pathways and that's another thing. I create paddocks through mowing. I have a BCS mower that'll mow lines.
And can you describe that mower?
It's a walk-behind tractor.
Yep.
So
like a Gravely kind of?
Yeah, it's just a more beefy Gravely.
Okay.
It's an Italian tractor that you can have. It's got a PTO, so you can do mowing, you can do tilling, you can do whatever. There's an implement for. It exists. It's really handy, but it's a beast. So like, I know that a coworker of mine, she was trying to till up something the other day, and I was like, "Oh, you just use the BCS," and she was like, I'm not using that thing because it's like jarring, And she probably couldn't handle it because I have like 30 pounds on her or something, So, Yeah, so the idea right now that I'm kind of excited about is the idea of planting sort of nitrogen fixing ground cover, you know, that is easily mowed and comes back as in these summer spots, you know, like having summer paddocks that are essentially like
That have automatic shade.
automatic shade,
Automatic.
right? And where my mind has been going lately is like, how do I incorporate those into like an orchard system? Like, can it be in between the tree rows? What's my spacing got to be? Because the number one thing is I have to be able to mow it over. Like,
When the apples don't fall.
right, I have to be able to get access to the fruit because that's one of my objectives as a fruit grower. Is like I see this as a diversified income stream. You know, where the pigs are. You know, hopefully one day there'll be like a year's worth of work that I can sell. Whereas the trees, you know, that I'm planting this year are 4 years, 5 years, 10 years down the road. But just like having those, you know, having that stratified economic situation going for me. So let me see, what else do I do with the pigs?
So if you have a new orchard where you have plantings, are you fencing in between those rows so that they can't, or are you putting some type of guard around each tree?
Yeah, we have tree tubes.
The tree tubes.
And mulch heavy around every tree. I really spend a lot of time mulching around, like I do some of the sheet mulching just to get the weed pressure down around the trees.
Okay.
But the pigs aren't around your little trees.
No. And
So
I had them around. I had the little pigs around my little trees, and they were okay. They didn't root them up, except for they were just careless with their bodies.
Right.
So they would just like flop over, and then off came a graph. You know, like
Yeah.
it was like, oh God, I gotta get these pigs out of here.
Careless, like they knew your grass were there, but they should have cared.
Yeah, they were careless. They were just like little fun babies, you know. And so they rooted, like they would eat the grass along. And I thought for a while they were gonna be perfect,
Right.
but no, they're not. They would just bend trees over. They would snap trees. They would break grafts off, you know. So, and same with the ducks, by the way. Ducks in the nursery is a no.
I'm going through that same kind of
Yeah.
experimental, like how much can I get away with of not having beans fenced from a few chickens and a few ducks, and like bit by bit they're making this area that the leaves are kind of nibbled.
Yeah.
But maybe by the end of the summer there will be no beans, or maybe the beans will get past them and they won't bother them. I don't know.
Right.
So anyway,
Yeah, I lost probably 100 trees, 100 little trees, which I
Out of
I have
a lot.
out of a 3,000, so it's not that much.
but you stopped it before because it could have kept going.
Oh yeah, it could have been catastrophic. So,
Right.
in an older orchard with older pigs, are you still, you're setting up your fencing, are you putting them between the rows so that they can't get anywhere near the trees, or you?
oh no, I
you're-
put them next to the trees. And
Okay.
let me pull out this picture again because
Yeah.
this is part of the practical pest management that pigs help me with in an amazing way.
Because it's not Mark Fulford's, and you do actually have
Yeah,
some
I
creatures
can't-
that live in apple
I
trees.
can't have limbs that low.
No, but I meant as far as an absence of bugs entirely.
Oh yeah, no, I have bugs, but because I'm like my name in the game is low input. Like
Yeah,
I
he's
don't wanna
putting over
put-
100 pounds every year
yeah,
to each
no,
tree.
and that takes time. Okay, so it's all a little bit grainy,
Time and
like
muscle.
FBI grainy. But okay, so if you look at this right here, so this is pigs getting the tree row is fenced essentially,
Yep.
and so this is, and you can see how this is white. The bottom of the trunks are all
They
a bit
rubbed
more
against
wider,
it.
so the pigs rub against it. Now this is great, I found, because they are wearing the bark down on those trees through using
dead
them as
part.
scratching
Yep.
poles. And I've watched wrens pick off codling moth as they're heading up the tree because that's been like
Like got a visual.
right, exactly. You're taking away their
Zone.
hiding spots, and I have a feeling there's a lot more insects that get picked off for that reason too, that I just didn't see. You know, I was in there for the specific reason of codling moth, because it's important to like learn
And if
your
you
insect cycles if you
have
want to get
orchards,
really
yeah.
practical with managing with animals, like that's where you learn from IPM. You know, integrated pest management. I don't use any of the sprays they do, but their monitoring techniques are genius for getting a real handle on what's going to come out of your soil and when. And that's through degree days, and that's like your self-study that I won't go through. But
in other words, it's in the IPM literature.
it's in the IPM literature, and
that's instructive.
yeah, and that's very important.
And so the sprouts on the apple roots there on the bases, do you think they're making more because the pigs are scratching them a bit, or they're just there?
I don't think they're apple roots, actually. I think that's
something else.
something else they didn't want to eat.
Okay. Because you already pruned off the root suckers.
Yeah, yeah. And since I've
And if there were root suckers, they
top side
probably
of
would
these trees.
eat the root suckers anyway.
Right. They're not really,
Right.
the pigs aren't eating, they don't eat apple leaves.
They don't want them at all.
No. At any stage, it seems. Like they never ate the nursery trees, they never ate.
Do they eat your winter prunings? Because I seem to think that my pig, when she was with the goats, would eat some apple buds in the winter when I brought them brush. I know she...
Maybe just because she's around goats that do that.
No,
you know.
she has her own mind, but like right now she's eating ash leaves like crazy. She's
Yeah.
hungry for green.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
they eat leaves for sure, but they just don't.
But apple leaves.
Maybe
no.
it's because I never feed them apple leaves. You know, that could be it. Like I've got my own agenda when dealing with the prunings as fast as possible, and so, and oftentimes when I'm pruning, the pigs aren't in that orchard. You know.
But you're feeding them pear sprouts.
Yeah, right now I'm
So you haven't tried the apple sprouts.
So I'll get into that too.
Yeah. Because they're not that different, so they may eat the apple.
So let me talk about what I'm doing with, let's see here. Let me talk about one more insect that affects you guys up here and how I'm dealing with that with pigs. And that's plum curculio. So plum curculio wreaks havoc in apples and in pears. There's a different version of it in plums. I think it's it's not a plum curculio that attacks plums. It's another curculio, but it's a weevil. So the weevil family, and it's it'll like thin your crop big time. And if you don't do anything about it, and so basically the way it works is the weevil overwinters in duff, in forest litter, and bramble piles, whatever. And in the spring, right after bloom, so when you have little fruit set, like little fruitlets that are less than 10 millimeters. That's when you got to start thinking, because at 10 millimeters is when these weevils emerge from the forest and lay eggs in the apples, and lay eggs in the pears, and lay eggs in whatever other fruit you have. And that, so they lay eggs, and it's up to the apple then to either grow, like if it's a strong growing apple, it can crush the egg case. But a lot of times it's not. They're not able to outgrow the egg case. So the egg grows and hatches, and the insect goes towards the middle of the apple and starts eating the embryonic seeds of the apple. And then the tree realizes that, oh no, this is not going to be any good for me anymore. The only objective of the tree is to propagate itself essentially. And well,
they love you and want to feed
right,
you.
Right, they love me too.
You.
But they. In life, one of their goals is to have many babies. Yeah, so once like those embryonic seeds are eaten, the tree immediately knows, and so abscission happens. The little apple falls to the ground, and it's a really interesting like coevolution of this weevil, because it falls to the ground at a state where like. There's no jarring, like the apple, it's small, the bug is small enough that, the insect's small enough that the little tiny casing of apple around it completely is like its cushion for falling on the ground. And then it eats and eats and eats, and it gets bigger and bigger, and then it goes into the soil, and then basically 2 weeks later it comes up, and it's an adult, and it stings your fruit again. And so... People have been. Plum curculio is like a big reason for spraying organophosphates. Which are bad. They're like
really bad.
They're like multiple target. They kill everything. And so I've talked to some IPM guys that are like, that's why you got to really get you got to really narrow down your window and get it right, because it's gonna kill everything. And I'm like, well, I don't want to kill everything. I want to just reduce the amount of plum curculio, because to an extent, like, I don't mind plum curculio in its first stage,
Because it thins and you
and it
then
thins
have to.
apples, exactly. But
Doing
the
your
problem is, you got to get those apples up because they're all infected with insects.
Which if you did it yourself, it's easier to thin them off the tree than find
Well,
them on the ground. Depending how high the tree is.
I've had my thumbs bleed from thinning apples
Yeah.
for too long. You know, it's just to a point where I don't want to do it anymore. Like, so what do you do then? Is you got to time it. And I went through and shook my trees as well to just get all the like little hanging, you know, curculio out of the tree and dropped, which works. It's about probably like 150 fruitlets fall per tree or something. You know, it's like
A lot easier than thinning.
yeah. And so then I moved the pigs in, and that's when little pigs are really good, or like maybe up to 100 pounds are really good. Anything smaller, and the pigs they're just not as precise when they get a little bit bigger. To me, it's like,
Wait, the big ones aren't as precise?
yeah, my bigger pigs like skip over some of the little apples. Like,
They're racing each other and
yeah, exactly. There's
wanting the biggest one.
yeah, maybe that might be it. Is that there's like competition.
So here's a pig story, not apples, but it applies to that detail work. So last fall's litter of pigs, Nick Jackson, who we'll see this afternoon, was buying most of them, and they went to his place. I didn't know they were doing this. They always would eat their mother's food and nurse too, and she'd get skinny and they get fat. And I was feeding them oats, and I think just dry oats by then, and because I just wasn't on top of my sprouting schedule. And they went to his place and with just the babies, and so we really got to see what they're doing. And they were sitting there and chewing and chewing and chewing, and the dish ended up with all the holes in it.
Mm.
That's how thorough they were.
Whoa. So I haven't had that happen.
And my grown-ups don't. My grown-ups poop out oats, and oats grow from their poop all the time.
Oh, awesome.
So there's a difference.
Yeah. So at the time I was doing this, I talked to a friend of mine, Ben Watson, who's in Vermont, who's a Chelsea Green editor, and he was like, "Oh, I just talked to somebody in Michigan who's doing this, and he's got Michigan researchers on his staff, like helping him out. And his name is Jim Cohn, and he's J.K. Scrumpy Hard Cider. And so I talked to Jim, and he's got a full-fledged Berkshire hog operation in addition to his organic cider, hard cider. And I was like, oh my God, I didn't know you even existed. We're on the same plane. And so what he's done for me is provided the scientific backing that this works. And so he got Michigan State University to come out and start and do trials with his pigs and plum curculio specifically, and saw a 95% reduction in plum curculio.
Wow.
And so
Do you have that study?
yeah, I think I have a blog entry on this
Okay.
that I link to. And my blog is elizaapples.com of my various rantings.
So 2 A's in a row.
Or I have both. You can do one. It used to be just 1A, but now I have both. They're both linked to the same address.
Okay.
Nice.
Yeah.
Good thinking.
Right. So, and so in talking with Jim about the whole question is of scale. Like, it takes a while for 5 little piglets to make their way, like, because I first did this when I got the 5 piglets from you.
Right.
And so I was like, come on, guys, like,
2 springs.
let's move.
3 springs ago.
3 springs ago, yeah. And so I, like, for a 100-foot tree row, for example, and these are like not standard, but like M7 trees, so they're like 14 feet tall, just about. So that generally means they're 14 feet wide. In this scenario,
If you allow them.
yeah,
Like most orchards.
this was allowed to happen, and so it was taking them like a week per row, 5 piglets. So I was like, I gotta get more, like I gotta figure out, and that's where I still am. It's just like, because Jim, he has like a ton of Berkshire hogs that are like 100 pounds by that point that he just lets run through his whole orchard. And he does it that way. Whereas I was targeting them row by row. And a lot of that is because they can really screw up in between your rows. Because I have
As far as driving your tractor?
driving my tractor, but also like, I've been, and I can talk about this too, is I've been planting row, essentially like in between the tree row cover as part of a management tool that I'll get into in a minute. But, so that's where I am right now, is figuring out like how many little, like, do I have to, should I like start a farrowing operation? Essentially, this is where I'm headed, is like, should I just grow little pigs, you know, and like sell those little pigs, and then, and have them, you know, they're started off on apples, they provide that, just thinking about it from an economic perspective.
Right. What's your best service?
Right,
To
exactly.
the community that best serves your orchard.
Right, because then I have my like old faithful tribe of pigs that I can move in, no problem. My guinea hogs I can move in for.
So I wanted to interject. I'm kind of putting together in my mind, hearing you and my experience of, and you keeping them out of the rows in the middle. So you know when they're going to flip sods is not when there's a bunch of tree roots. When I put them in where there's places of tree roots, and it stays fairly level because they don't go as deep.
Yeah, it's pretty shallow till underneath the trees.
Yeah, and so you're keeping them there, and that way you don't get those hummocks.
Right,
In the rest of it.
And when you're like looking into organic
Which is more
farming
fence moving.
and the idea of grass competing for nutrients with the trees and whatnot, you know, everybody uses, well, nobody uses Roundup in organic, but everybody uses Roundup outside of organic.
No, because they used to use paraquat.
Right. So it's always an
Where I
evolution
worked, they always used
of
paraquat.
herbicide.
They probably still do.
And so they herbicided all, you know, that row that I've been staking out with for the pigs to stay in, they herbicided that. And then if you run into like more organic people who are like kind of higher yielding, they till that. Like a lot of the English cider producers till that piece of ground underneath the trees. And so for me, it's like, well,
in China maybe they hand weed.
why not just let the pigs in, you know, and at certain times.
Or they probably let pigs in.
Because right is that, it's called June drop here, but it's really May drop for me, for the plum curculio apples. But right around that time is when they need weeding anyway. Like, because that's when your fruitlets are just starting to take off. Like the tree is, they're like summoning a massive amount of nutrients to go into the fruit. Because there's like vulnerable times. And so that's one of them. And so for me, like, I don't really like the idea of rooting or tilling or anything, but it gives me street cred, really, when like bringing people over, essentially, like,
because at least you're keeping your orchard.
Yeah,
looking like
exactly.
their orchard.
Right, exactly. It's something they can relate to, because otherwise it's like completely off the wall. Which, you know, like, I have a real difficulty with extension agents, with university researchers. Like, I have a serious difficulty with them. Like, everything I'm doing is wrong to them. So,
Difficulty
because
you're having
have
difficulty with them getting them to relate to you or
right,
collaborate together.
because they only know growing for dessert fruit. They only know, it's just different. It's all different, and that's just how it is. And they're all, this school of thought is so rehearsed for so long that it's what they know.
Yeah.
Like, I often say, if I get another like apprentice or something, they are not going to have a horticultural background. Like, they're already ruined by that point. Like, you know. For me, I escaped it because I have a forestry background, you know, and so I didn't get into the rigors of management like that. Okay, so now I want to tell you about why I don't want them in between my tree rows in that alley space. And that's just because, so the Food Safety Modernization Act is coming down the pipe. Well, it's already been approved, but they haven't released their raw manure time frame. And so, basically, if you were a conventional grower of fruit or non-organic, up until forever, you know, up until now, maybe, you could have animals in your orchard and you could harvest your fruit at any time you want, and everything was fine. But if you're organic, you can't harvest your fruit for, is it 90 or 120 days?
It was 90.
It was 90
Last I knew.
days. Yeah.
As far as I know, it's 90.
And I've
it's
heard
not
them
the most
thinking about bumping it up to 120 days. So that means no plum curculia, no pig.
Even when you have a test that says these guys are parasite free.
Right, and they're just afraid of E. coli.
Right.
On the fruit because, well, really, it's the same standards. Tree fruit is held to the same standards as spinach. It's the same thing. And it's a
Right.
it's a crime. And one day I'm going to crowdfund
Even if you're picking
a
up off the tree
lobbyist
and
to
they're never
change
hitting
it
the
for
ground.
me. Yeah. Okay, so then that becomes all right. Well, especially for you northeaster people, that ruins you in terms of practicality of animals in an orchard, in a food producing like agroforestry system.
And yet I just had one year of inspector who said my peaches pass as long as I'm picking off the trees. But most years the inspector's been nope, it's like spinach.
Yeah.
You know, the
And
trees
actually,
still
maybe
taking it up.
if you could turn off one of the stands of oats I had done. It was super wet when I cut one of the rows, and the two girls I had of pigs ended up with like really swollen vulvas, like not pregnant, really swollen. And I was talking. Facebook has an amazing pastured pig site that has like so many amazing practiced, experts, and a bunch of them were like, I think that might be like some sort of mycotoxin, like it just, that's what that is. It's like interesting, like I didn't even tell you what they were eating, like super wet oat heads, that had sat there for a few weeks. And so, but that was
So did it worry you? It just did that, and they seemed to come through.
Yeah, they came through. And so I think the only downside to that would be if you had pregnant sows. That would be the issue.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
But it was an old practice.
It's a super old practice.
But it was probably for the ones that were fattening, not for the sows.
Right. Because like I have those two girls I'm going to keep for a long time, and cycle through. And I'm probably going to breed them again, and we'll go from there. But
some people told me they only breed their pigs for 3 years.
Twice a year, for 3 years.
I don't know, probably.
Yeah, that might be it.
And then they're too old. What's wrong?
No, these girls
They
are
live
fine.
14, 15. Is your childhood pig still around?
Yes, she might be the oldest
17
pig.
now? 18?
22.
22.
Wow.
She might be be
Yeah.
the oldest pig in the United States.
childhood
In the United States, you should call up Ripley.
I know. I wanna check and see like what's the oldest age for a
Korean
pig.
potbelly.
Vietnamese pot belly.
Vietnamese.
Yeah, she's super old.
At your parents' house.
Yeah, she's also very mean now. She's very very mean. She's got arthritis.
So she probably is the only one, because no other families is tolerant.
Yeah, I guess so.
It's like geese; they can live to be 100
She
years
has,
old,
like-
but who lets them?
She has a cat. her best friend is this mean cat. And so I'm just like,
Oh gosh, I felt like my child.
and neither of them let you near them now. So it's like a feral cat too. It's not even a.
So you have
So
these,
when they planted, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay. No, go ahead.
Well, I'll remember mine. I wrote it down.
So you have these like very specific uses for pigs in the orchard with like cleaning up old ones or for the curcular job. So do you think it would not be a great idea to kind of leave them in the alleyways as like a grazing system just because they're gonna hump
No, I
their
think
bills?
that could work too.
Okay.
It's just not my objective right now. Like I'm just
Okay.
trying to use them as tools.
Yeah.
And probably when I get a breed or mixed breed or whatever that grows faster,
Yeah.
I'll move them into that. There will be planned areas like pasture in between tree rows.
Okay.
So this is just like orchard. I'm just talking to you about like what I'm doing in the orchard
Right.
for these pigs.
Yep.
What I'm planning on doing, and I guess this will get into. Do we need a break or anything? Is everybody okay? I'm just trying
Well,
to-
Yeah, before you open what you're planning, I just
Okay.
had the question that's more of what
Okay.
we've already been talking about.
11.
Just, so in the old text, did they let the pigs, when the curculia dropped, run the whole orchard so that they tilled that up for your plantation of oats at the same time with just one big fence?
I'm assuming
Good
they
question.
did.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
That was all I needed.
Yeah, I'm assuming they did.
But you're not because you're.
I'm not in Vermont. It's basically why. And I just like
but you're having
need a
them
lot of
till
pigs.
the.
yeah, and
But you're having
them
them till those strips of your tractor rows.
I could have. It just would take too much
Oh,
time.
you're not having them till the
I'm
tractor.
not having them
You're
till-
tilling it. Okay.
Right, because
That's what I'm
just
checking.
because it's faster for me.
Well, and it makes it hummocky and everything else, and that's
Yeah.
hard to drive the tractor, so they'd have to do a good job.
right, and that takes time. It takes more time for them
Right.
to do a good job.
Right. Okay. So you're not.
Yeah.
They're not doing the tilling there. That's all I wanted.
Right.
But they probably did.
Okay. Any questions so far before I
And the
move
other
in?
thing is they weren't running tractors; they were running horses, so the hummocks didn't matter as much.
Right. Right. And I would love some draft horse person
Yeah.
to come live at the farm. I will not ever do draft horses.
Oh,
but
no.
I do not like horses.
Now,
They just
have you thought
cost
about
so much
using your
money.
pigs?
So
Your pigs as draft animals too.
yeah, I've thought about it. That's a fun. It's a
Because
fun thing.
mine have their harnesses on full time,
Yeah.
and I stake them both. And the one was a year old and never was leash trained or anything, and he's now stakeable.
Yeah.
And I haven't made any extra efforts with him.
Yeah. It's just
Except
a matter
that
of
she teaches them, hey, it's okay to stay here because I'm here.
right. So yeah, I don't really put a whole lot of thought in your draft animals at all right now.
Right.
Because I don't have
That's
the
for us
time, but I also don't
In 20
have.
years after we've gotten everything all up and running and
Right. If shit
in a
hits the
nice
fan,
homeostasis.
I'm positive I can figure out ways to do this without a tractor.
Right.
You know,
Right.
like I'm covered. I think
Right.
we'll be okay. But
But,
in the meantime,
I bet pigs could even pull
the tractor's
apple
really
carts.
amazing.
As long as they get
So-
a dose of apples first. So that
Like I can do so much in a morning that would take me weeks.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, so. Okay. So, any more questions,
About.
insights about like how I'm actually using the pigs?
I think we can move on
We'll move
So-
on.
to what you're planning.
Yeah.
good.
Could I have you
Go ahead.
theorize quickly on
Sure.
cattle in
Oh, yeah.
orchards? And
Yeah.
then,
Awesome.
It's so. Let me show you this picture of I'll pull it out in just a minute. To my. Okay.
I never
So
really
in
had
France,
that.
cattle are in orchards,
Anyway, I can always grab anything with this.
and I heard, and it's just a thing. There's cider orchards. The cattle are in them. The trees are pruned higher, so that they're not. They can have some, but they're
You
not.
might
gonna-
need ladders.
you
Of
might
all
need.
scary things for the insurance company.
No, they shake. The,
Oh, yeah.
all the. I said shaking in the United States is such a scary thing, but because of E. coli and whatnot. But they shake in every other part of the world, and
I'm glad you're saying that.
And I'll show you this real
Shaking's
quick
fun.
before I show you this cattle picture of where I'm headed in my regulation, not dodging regulations. I just found somebody to build one of these for me.
Oh, is this the thing you put
Yeah.
up? Yeah.
This
Yeah.
Oh,
That was a
sweet.
great discussion.
is the most amazing,
Whoa.
easy tool
Oh yes.
of it's a trailer. It wraps around the tree. You can climb in the tree and shake it. You can. A friend of mine
It's
is.
an opposite umbrella.
It's an opposite
Love
umbrella.
They use
and
this
it's
on
got-
cherries, don't they?
Yeah, but you can use it on anything,
course.
And it's 18 feet in
Acorns.
diameter, and it's adjustable, so you can adjust the sides. But that is the way to me to get around, so you can
These
shake and
problems
have
with
your
food
apples.
Like
like so I can have
so the
animals.
organic standards should start writing a standard involving
Exactly.
that gives you a waiver of the 90-day rule.
Right, exactly. It absolutely should, because you can
There's
even
nobody
have your.
saying that the
You can
that
have
the-
your bushel basket, so
Right.
they empties into a bushel basket, and you can have that elevated off the ground too. So
The
anyway,
trick is they just need to have the definition of the woody plants, where the plant line draws off where those E. coli aren't going up the stem and into it.
right.
It would take a little bit of
And you,
politicking and work and
yeah, and I just met
research collection.
a guy. He's a lawyer. He's actually a lawyer in Maine who came up to me and started chatting, and then realized that he knew me kind of through different things, and he's a former lobbyist, and knows the process, and so I was just like,
Harvey does too.
I'm gonna find the money, and we're gonna go after this, which really might be a crowdsource thing to allow.
Can I ask you how? Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
How much your friend is building that for you for?
So, $2,000 is what that
That's
thing
not bad.
costs. Which he'll build it for me for.
Okay.
So, yeah.
That's-
It's so worth it
That's
too if you
doable.
think about the time it might have taken to
Yeah.
pick your cherries, for example. This would take 3 minutes.
Right. Wow.
And so, anyway, that's something that I'm really excited about. Eastern European technology coming over the United States. Okay, so this is the picture of how they have cows in a dwarf orchard
Do they have dwarf
in
cows?
Kyrgyzstan. No, full size.
There you go.
So you see that one rope tied around the front leg.
Right.
This is for the day, and then they take it off. This I don't think would pass animal cruelty standards.
But it's funny because Africa also, they think it's cruel to tie by a collar, and they do the leg of most animals. And here, it's the reverse,
Right,
They go
it's a
to tie by their
cultural
collar.
taboo thing. So, in France they do it and they limb their trees up, and it's fine because they're shaking all that fruit. In Kyrgyzstan they do it and they have the cow's head down, because that's a dwarf orchard.
Oh, okay,
Okay.
I'm sorry. I was thinking they were staked. They're not staked. They're just,
Oh, they're
heads
tying
down.
their. Okay.
Yeah, and so,
They're still free.
right, they can't,
What's the deal?
there's a certain point where they can, they can pretty much see eye level, but they can't go up like this.
Right. Okay.
And if that were goats, that would be more of an animal cruelty than with a cow.
Goats would be in the trees.
With a pig, the pig wouldn't even notice.
Right, the pigs wouldn't notice at all. It's not even necessary. Yeah. So I think that. So I've only really. I don't have a lot of time to think about cattle and whatnot.
Yeah.
I love the idea of miniature cattle.
Oh my God.
We'll see one this afternoon. Not miniature,
Yeah, and
Dexter.
Well, and just like, but a lot of times they have like pretty comparable yields for feed conversion, at least feed conversion rates, or sometimes even better.
You mean as far as the smaller animals
Yeah.
versus the bigger?
Right. So, in thinking about that, then you wouldn't have to limb up your trees as much, or you just have sacrifice limbs. Essentially, that's fine too. But I think it's totally doable. Like you're, they're pasture based. Like they want to eat, and they want to eat the fruit too. I don't see why you couldn't run them in. It would be a faster. I think it would be faster than the pigs in a way.
Yeah.
Like you would have to, because just like with grass and protein amounts and whatnot, some people move theirs 2 times a day, and that might be what you do. You move them 2 times a day through the orchard.
As far as eating plum Julia apples,
Oh no, this
No,
would
that
be
would be
later in the
thorough.
season, I think.
we're just talking.
Yeah, this is just like eating grass, and eating some of the trees.
I was gonna say,
'Cause I don't
God,
know,
get
like-
'em all.
I don't know how much they like early apple drops, or I don't really know.
Like goats do, but they
a
don't like
cow's
eating off
affinity
of ground
for-
where they've pooped.
Yeah, so I haven't talked with anybody in France who
But
does
the
it in
geese-
those cider orchards because they all
the
speak
geese are
French.
an option.
So if any of you speak French, we can. Oh, you do? Do you speak well?
Oui.
Okay, good. Maybe I'll enlist you to have some Skype conversations with me where you're just
So geese
talking
are
in
traditional in
English.
orchards as well. I just want to throw that in.
Yeah, and so
And
I
they
have
would
seen.
throw about little apples.
I
As
have
long as you're
seen
not feeding
geese
them too much grain.
completely girdle pretty large trees, though. I will say that,
Right.
and
Mine do not.
that's probably some sort of nutrient deficiency, and
In
they
the
haven't
winter.
been mine. Yeah, it's been in the winter.
Okay, in the winter they
Yeah.
do. Yeah, you
And
don't
so
put them in
they've
the
been
winter.
a terrible thing on some orchards that I've
Yeah, but
I've had
that's
to
not
do-
when you're putting them in for plum
right.
fruit.
I've had to do bridge grafting and things like
Yeah,
that.
me too.
So, yeah, you would. I think if you ran geese and pigs during plum curculio time, you would be doing really well. Because they do have a different way of sweeping the floor than the pigs do.
They're definitely.
But not ducks.
Ducks are good too, I think, but
They
maybe
don't clean up
later
the fruit, though.
later in the season when
these
it's
are-
like ducks. So for me, like ducks, I have ducks follow the pigs or are in with the pigs in the summertime to
Okay.
reduce flies, and it works. They're
Yeah.
just like zoom, zoom, zoom. You
Nice.
know.
One writer was describing geese inhale fruit. Like these
Yeah.
ones eat fruit and these ones eat fruit, but the
Right.
geese inhale fruit.
Ducks are like protein based, I think.
Yeah,
more so
Mhm.
they're like
They're looking
Yeah,
for
they're
the
like
snails and
CrossFit.
slugs.
athletes. So,
They like to fish.
yeah. So, and the other thing about like animals in orchards once you like establish them is that orchards can be your tree posts, your post for your fencing if it gets to that too. Like even though I fence in within the, like they're within the tree row, my pigs are. If I wanted to switch to cattle a couple weeks later or something, I could move that over, and there are like insulators on essentially rubber ties that you can just have around the tree and run your at whatever height, you know, electric fencing using your trees. So if you plan your orchards that, you know, if you are planning for having, you know, larger animals in, or even if you want pigs or whatever, basically pigs, because fowl pay no attention to electric fencing for me, but you can plan. It's good to plan your fencing as
Bicycle inner tubes
living
can be
posts.
the insulator.
Hmm?
Bicycle inner tubes can be the insulator.
Right, you can use bicycle inner tubes too. You just gotta
I
find
mean,
it.
they are the insulator.
You just gotta find a well, something to hold easily. Sometimes it's really nice for me
Not to have to tie knot. Yeah.
to not have to tie knots, and
Yeah,
so I
sure.
can just go through and
So
put
I
it through.
have this stainless wire. I've made hooks, clips.
Right, that.
That's a fence panel, but I
Right.
also have the little clips that you buy for like so much, like $10 a bag or something, that I twist out of that.
Yeah. So I'm just really
Little
for
spring
me,
clips.
it's time, you know, and so if I can invest, and they're pretty cheap, like it's like $7 for a bag of 25 or something, and so I can if I can have those mounted onto some form of inner tube or rubber that can just easily, without injuring the tree, you know, tie on, then
And have them there.
that's a really great thing
And then pop
because it's instant
fences on
fencing.
and off.
Yeah.
And
Right.
Your strings already there.
Right, and you can just have your deep
'Cause
cell battery.
Your cows take 2 strings, your pigs take 2 strings. Just
Mhm.
move the 2 strings over,
Right, exactly.
tighten them up right.
Mm-hmm. So you can think about that too. That's just something else to incorporate
puzzle to-
into your thoughts. Yeah, is like because some people are like in permaculture, there seems to be a straight lines are a bad thing, or like efficiency standards are like a bad thing in permaculture a lot of the time. Like, and I just want to say that that's there just for ease. You can make a system as complicated
Right.
as possible, but
And
it's going
I'll
to take time.
And I'll say, my fences for my animals none of them are straight lines.
Yeah.
And with the pigs, it's a short enough post that you can make curves without any stays, because there's so little tension required on such a short. I mean, the ground
Right.
is going because I'm using 18-inch.
Right, because it's so
fiberglass.
low. Your line is so low.
It's so low; it has
Yeah.
so little leverage. You can go around a corner without a stay,
Right.
and so you can make curves and everything. And then if you're using the apple trees, those could be along the key line. They could be
Oh,
any way
totally.
you want
Totally.
because you don't need.
But I
stays 'cause
guess
they
what I'm
got
saying
roots.
is it's
So-
a line, rather
Oh, it's
than
still
like
a line, but it's a
like
curvy
a
line.
checkerboard,
A curvy line.
of wild,
Curvy line.
like a food forest. You never see as something that is trees in a line, essentially. Like a lot of those
But
designs
Mark Shepard
are.
stuff is in lines because he's doing bigger scale.
Whew, Mark Shepard stuff. This is an aside. Mark Shepard. No, I'll talk to him directly through the camera. He needs to go to a Kyrgyzstan-like setup of gridding out his property because it's unharvestable. And so this is the next step I'm going to talk about. And
His is unharvestable?
It's, in any way that would create a profit. So, as an example, I've worked in orchards where I hired migrant workers to harvest apples at $10 an hour. And that's making bank for them. And I want them to harvest as many apples as they can possibly do in an hour's time or whatever, within a day. And so, in Mark Shepard's situation, he's got an apple that's ripe here, and then maybe 150 feet over here is a ripe apple, and then over here, 30 more feet over here. And so just the counting the time of just people walking and then bringing the bushels back or trying to find a central location or scooping them up,
it's okay if
you're losing money.
It's okay if it's pick your own.
Right. And so that's what he needs to move into is essentially like family grids of pick your own, where they learn, because it's diverse. They've got mulberries and all sorts of stuff, and people need to have long-term leases on these little squares of fruit forest so that they can learn when things are ripe. They're there. They have it all mapped out.
Because even then, you don't want to carry your bushel basket around once it has 18 apples in it.
Right.
To way over there to get the next one, or
well, this is what I'm saying.
Run back and forth and trample the grass that the geese want.
Right. Well, what I'm saying is like the size of this. Your downstairs here. If that was gridded out, and so like a person had it, and so they would come to his farm, and they figured out through observation like when everything was ripe. Then that would be their own like you pick season. 6 months of fruit or whatever. Like, that would be the way for him to go, because otherwise he can't harvest it. And this is really important to think about in, like, if you're just looking to derive some income off of it, like, it's important to think about it from ease.
Count your steps.
Yeah, you got to count your steps. Exactly. Like, because steps cost money, either they cost you calories and time.
And they're fun if they're in a beautiful place.
Right, but, even that gets old sometimes. So... my place has a lot of steps. You have a lot of steps, but your objectives are different from mine.
Yeah,
too.
very different.
So,
and that's the property I got, which was affordable.
Yeah, exactly.
And the other people before me in 1939 had the same steps, because it was this little clearing.
Right.
And that little clearing and that little clearing.
And over history, we've taken, significantly less steps.
That's where the soil is, though.
Right. As we evolve, for the better or worse, we take less steps.
But that's different steps.
Right. Your steps are like living steps.
Yeah, there's more going on in between.
Yeah.
Than just trying to get that next apple that's the same to put in your basket.
Right, exactly. Okay. So, any more questions? Anything? Because then I'll go into planning. Okay. So, given economics, essentially, and how that works, and time is money, I have gone, for the last several years, down this, like, total rabbit hole of complete horticultural nerdery, which is harvest timing. So, there are 17,000 apple varieties. We probably have to this right now, that are accessible through orchards across the United States, like 7,000 varieties. The other 10,000 are on homesteads, and it would be hard to find. You'd have to find them. So, of those 7,000 apple varieties that still exist, there are some that fruit in some that fruit in May, June, July, August, September, October, November.
And we're talking...
This is apples that...
Virginia, Maryland.
Well, May. the earlier months, for sure. The more south you go, you'll see May apples.
August, September, October.
But June apples for sure. Even June apples where I am, it just is frost tender, that timing for your late frost window. And then you have apples that hang on the tree, January, February. Usually by March they're all knocked off. And just using that as an example, when you're incorporating animals into the scenario, and let me just preface this by saying, my definition right now of tree fodder is fruits for right now.
Right.
And that's just
nuts
how
aren't
I'm
bearing yet.
Right, my nuts aren't
Enough.
bearing. But I can talk about that too.
Yeah.
But rather than leaves, we're just going to stick with fruit right now.
Right.
So, if you're moving animals and you want to move them purposefully, you'd like to get the most bang out of your move, which would be you'd like to move them to where they're cleaning up fruit for you.
Right.
And the easiest way to do that is to time your plantings by harvest dates, which is very complicated in the planting stage, but really pays off in the moving stage, because you're not left with trees that are, dropping fruit after you just move them, or if you three moves ago they're dropping fruit again, It's like from an orchard or cleanliness, like where I am, I have a lot of humidity, and so that's something I also need the animals to kind of, by them cleaning up some of that infected fruit, also eating some of those infected leaves, which is another subject.
As in the scabby leaves.
Yeah. But that's important, and so I want them to just do a deep clean,
All at once.
Get some weight added to them all at once, and then next one. And so that's the idea that I've been working on is basically paddocks by bi-weekly paddocks, essentially, like every 2 weeks.
The plum cuculio thing, though, that's kind of all at once. No
Right,
matter
so that's
whether it's
different.
an early apple or a late apple.
Yeah, plum
That's
cuculio
a
is all at
bug.
once.
Yeah.
And, well, flowering can be different. Like there's the Rawls Janet that will flower in late May,
Okay.
And
Okay,
then,
ours isn't very, I think ours is more condensed, probably.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we definitely have a longer bloom time than you guys do.
Right.
So I'm what I've been working on is, and actually I'm getting paid to do this through the farm I'm working on now, because she's viewing it as, I got her to view trees as infrastructure, which they should be, because they're long term, but also I'm kind of being, in a way, I'm a farmer on the land, but in another way I'm a designer of her land for other farmers to move into this, choice system. And so, anyway, this is one of the jobs I'm getting paid for, which is really good, because otherwise I can't make time for it, really. But this way I can, because it's part of my income, which I'm very lucky and blessed for. And so, I have, so just as an example, so let's take last week as an example. So what is the date today? The
14th.
14th? All right, so let's take
July.
the first 2 weeks of July. Is that I have 3 apple varieties, known apple varieties, that have ripened in the last 2 weeks. I have an ever-bearing mulberry that drops huge amounts of mulberries for 3 straight months. So that's one of those that like gets left behind because it keeps, like maybe I put chickens in after the pigs or whatever. But it's a long-bearing mulberry. I have a pear that bears that week, or in those 2 weeks. I have the blueberries just finished. Blueberries for me are June.
High bush.
High bush blueberries. Yep. Yeah, we don't have. You don't have your delicious blueberries. And so that's three fruit species in the first 2 weeks of July. I can block out by cultivar to drop in those 2 weeks. Some years they might be earlier, or some years they might be later, but so will everything else. It's all.
And hopefully they'll stay
That's the
semi
phenology of it all. Yeah. And so that's what I'm planning out essentially. But I'm planning wider rows. So 30-foot spacing. Well, 30 foot in between the rows spacing, because I'm planning for this to be like, it's humans can come in and get this fruit, but also animals will really benefit from it as well, as a cleanup situation, because there's always fruit left over, like there always is, and especially with like fruit drops, fruits, the diseasey fruit, whatever, you can just leave behind. And so
especially if you know it's going to be good tasting pork.
Yeah, exactly, and it takes 2 months for pork, for your pigs, to absorb essentially the flavors. They need to eat whatever it is for 2 months in order for those flavors to shine through.
Unlike milk, which is almost
instantaneous. Right, and it seems like unlike garlic.
That
Yeah, it seems like garlic and onions are pretty instantaneous too.
Even in pork?
Yeah, maybe like in a month or so that would
In a good way or a bad way?
Some people say it's bad.
Depends if you like them.
Yeah. Some people don't comment, so I don't know.
Do you like it? All right.
Yeah, I'm fine with it, really. But it's different. I really like what I've seen with ours is like when we slaughtered one last winter after having them purely basically on apples and pears and grapes for the 2 months prior, was the fat. It's the difference is really in the fat. Like that fat was almost like
Mouth-watering.
it was mouth-watering, but two, it was kind of fruity. Like it had
Sweet.
yeah, it was sweet fat, like so good. like amazing fat. So, and that's like
And that's when you want a lard pig.
that's when you want
When
a
you have
lard
really
hog.
good fat.
Exactly, but yeah,
It gets
totally.
back in the
But
public
you-
psyche as an actual food.
But also, like, in doing this planning, I'm having to. I'm not much of a grass farmer, and so I'm having to lean on some, grazing friends of mine who are, because you want to have, ideal pastures too. Like, but you're essentially having a silvo pasture where the trees are providing shade, they're providing some, fruit fodder, and then they're also eating like this luscious high protein grass that they're moving, pretty quickly. So. Yeah, it all gets kind of, it's all complicated. It's synchronous, exactly.
You want it to be synchronous.
Yeah.
You're aiming for.
Right. And so one of the areas I'm also geeking out on, okay, so let me back up a minute and say we have probably about 15 acres of federally funded tree plantings called CREP, which is Conservation Reserve something program. And it takes endangered or like highly erodible ag soils out of tillage is essentially the program. It's still available today. If anybody Grant Schultz, he has a similar planting in Iowa where he planted 100 acres of trees and got them all paid for.
This is something that you're saying can happen here too.
This is like a farm hack of how
Federal.
to get the federal government to pay for your tree planting. It just takes.
Can you say it again? CREP?
Yeah, it's called CREP or CRP, CREP or
I've heard of CRP.
CRP or CREP, and also through EQIP, EQIP, which I think is what actually grants is EQIP. But so like riparian zones fall under CRP and CREP, and then like maybe hillsides that are highly erodible are still under there, and then after that you can get EQIP to take over farmland essentially. And so they'll pay you like $6 a tree, and you.
Do they pay anything for the follow through?
Yeah, it's under an easement program, so they pay you to mow essentially, and or to spray around. Most people are spraying Roundup, but
they pay you to spread wood chips or chip wood chips.
I haven't asked actually. Maybe they might. Because the goal is also like kind of, in a way, it's like a wildlife corridor kind of situation too. But you can use this to your benefit. So I have these 15-year plantings that I'm leasing as part of the 70 acres. And they just fell out of their easement time frame. So I'm now free. And you have to really dig deep into the legal work if you're thinking about this. Because there's different easements run by, like the DNR has some easements that won't let you have any animals in there for like the perpetuity of its being there. Meanwhile, mine, everything was up at year 12, and so I'm free to go. And so I have this.
Were you saying that they're also interested in it as a wildlife corridor thing?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's part of their incentive, their
right
goals.
Yep. And so one of the things, so I would have planted this completely different had I been there 15 years ago, but I wasn't. And so now what I have are...
So someone else did this through them.
Someone else did.
Got it funded.
At the farm, got it funded. They made $2 million off of planting these trees.
How many acres?
I don't know how many in total. I think they ended up planting 200,000 trees, though. And so
Like
it's a 900 acre... It's
of the plantation.
Bits and pieces of 900 acres
all
around.
Scattered here.
Yeah, I mean, most of the property I'm on has a creek running through it, and so It's
Got lots of
most,
funding for it.
a lot of it is around that in the riparian zones.
So then it was bare before?
It was sheep farm
Wow.
bare, you know.
I don't
and-
have anywhere to put trees.
Yeah,
That's not
right.
really
So
totally treed.
this was all mowed, you know, all mowed down. So when they planted them 10 by 10. You have to plant them on 10 by 10 grids. And
Period, no matter what kind of tree.
Yeah, no matter what. It's crazy. And
Makes their work.
because they're expecting like, you know, a 50% success rate pretty much. But then the guy that planted them where I am, he planted them on contour, which is a really interesting scenario. So I have all these trees in one of, you know, in parts of my leased land that they're like hickories and walnuts and persimmons and redbud and hawthorn and wild plum, and some northern pecan made
Sounds
it in
pretty
there.
lovely.
It's awesome.
On 10
It's so
foot
awesome.
grid.
Like that's what I saw when I was first there. I was like, oh my god, I'm gonna lease this. Like she doesn't realize like the potential of this.
How good this could taste
Yeah.
in a few years.
So what I'm doing with that, and it's all part of this fruiting scheme essentially. Like the timing is I'm
Are
digging.
those trees in like patches or is it like mixed?
Strips, apparently.
They're all mixed. I mean, it's real. Some of them are in like there's you mean by species?
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. So there's some rows that have like 4 redbuds in a row, you
Mhm.
know, and then like 2 walnut. It's just random. Like
Okay.
you could tell they had all the when they were planting them with the tree planter. They were just grabbing handfuls of things and throwing them in.
Mhm.
Hopefully they all kind of end up the same height.
Yeah, so it's a little bit difficult from its current state.
Mhm.
But what I've been doing is I've been digging deep into the Northern Nut Growers Association, which, if any of you are interested in agroforestry, that's definitely one of the organizations you need to join. Like, without a doubt, it's the best kept secret, and I think, in all of agroforestry, is the Northern Nut Growers Association. It was founded in 1910, and one of the presidents was J. Russell Smith. For several years, he was president
One that you
of
tracked after in Virginia.
They have been heading up breeding projects for a century or more. They have the locations of old breeding projects that went defunct.
Do they have any relationship with the American Chestnut Society at all?
They kind of hate the American Chestnut Society.
That's what I wondered.
Yeah, because the American Chestnut Society's... So, Northern Nut Growers is also comprised of, like, a lot of scientists.
Right.
And the American Chestnut Society,
There's a
their
bunch of volunteers
breeding
mostly.
program is haphazard
Mhm.
compared to what a lot of the Northern Nut Growers people... Like, Sandra Androstaki, I can't say her last name, it's Greek, and it's, like, 26 letters long. She's the chestnut expert. Probably knows more about chestnuts than anybody else in the United States, other than like Greg. I can't think of his last name at Empire Chestnuts, and she is super critical of the American Chestnut Foundation. But anyway,
And she's with these guys?
Yep. She's with them. She's always at the annual meetings, and she's super helpful. And I'll get into that in a minute. So, of the perks of being part of the Northern Nut Growers Association is they're aside from like a few women and men in their 50s and 60s and maybe early 70s, everybody's like over 80. And so it's really pertinent to get in now and get to know these people because
Before
they're
they
amazing.
die.
Because they are so generous too. And so like Jerry Lehman he's a persimmon and pawpaw breeder grower. But he's also a member of, he started out as a member of Northern Nut Growers because the North American Fruit Explorers came out of Northern Nut Growers. And so Jerry Lehman has been able to give me the names, not quite all the scion yet, of, you know, fruit schemes for every 2 weeks for persimmons from August through January, you know, that are kind of thing. And that's through Northern Nut Growers. But at the same time, like, Sandra at the Connecticut Extension Service, you know, I'm really interested in higher density plantings as well.
And by the way, Mo in Montville has bearing persimmons.
Yeah, Mo is amazing.
Yeah.
You should also get to know Mo.
He's coming tonight.
Okay, Mo
Well, I gotta
probably
remind
has
him.
been a
I should
member of
call
the
him.
Northern Nut Growers Association, I would imagine.
He's only, like, he doesn't have any answering service whatsoever.
Is his
Yeah.
phone back
You have
on?
his VM. Was it off?
Mhm.
I don't know.
I know people who called Mo the Oracle. Which I think is so spot on sometimes. Like, anyway,
I dated him.
I know you dated him.
I have a song with the ukulele with him.
So anyway,
He's one of my buddies.
so just as a matter of like getting actual information on fruiting times, of what's working well, like talking to these people about, because they're all growing them, or they've all like reclaimed people who've died's collections, and you know they're just like, and they're about to die, and so they're looking to pass it on. So if you're looking for a wealth of genetics, that's for sure the way to go. But the information is just so priceless. Like,
And these folks are scattered over a lot of different states.
from Alaska to Texas to
Yeah.
Florida to Maine,
Yeah.
you know, I mean they're
How many
everywhere.
people do you think?
Well, at their heyday it was like thousands. But
Right.
now it's like 600, 700.
Yeah.
They're endowed. That organization is endowed.
Good
so,
thing.
Yeah, so they'll stick around as long as there's people. But like
Show up to
the
the meeting.
membership organizations are sort of failing across the boards, and so
Because
except
you're
for
just members on Facebook now.
right, exactly. But so just to say, like I've gotten through the Northern Nut Growers, I've gotten a chestnut variety called. It's a hybrid called Little Giant, and I'm very interested in it because I'm interested in higher density plantings because like with high density apples, you know, you can have 2,000 trees per acre and you're getting 2,000 bushels per acre in like year 3, you know, whereas if you had 200 trees per acre on a semi-dwarf planting, you would get like 200 bushels in year 5, and like maybe 400 bushels in year 7. You know, it goes progressively up, but they both sort of plateau. There's a point where the bigger plantings last longer. They're older,
You don't have
whereas
to
the
replant.
younger plantings die off because they're on weaker root systems. You know, after like year 25.
Just like
But you're
Dwarf
making
apple trees.
a lot more fruit earlier with the higher density plantings. And so what I've been interested in is the idea of dwarfing trees, so that they can still be on. They don't have to be propped up or trellised or anything. They're just smaller, so I can have more in a space to produce essentially more fruit in that space. And I'm calling these feedlots because
so more fruit in that space sooner.
sooner.
But you're saying they both plateau at the same bearing,
Yeah, and then larger ones tend to
and
take
those
over.
ones keep going. So this is a shorter lived
Right.
thing, but you want it sooner.
Right, and so this is all part of my, my timeline. Is I
Right.
have bigger plantings, I have smaller plantings,
Right.
you know.
To
Do
hold you over
Do you
until the big
plant the
ones get
smaller
going.
plantings in successions?
I don't know yet.
You should.
Yeah, I mean,
think-
I'm just right now, all this is on
By the time
paper
you get very
and
many
the
successions, the big ones will be going.
yeah, and the genetics, I'm just getting the genetics on my property, and I've got it all on paper now. And I've got most of the genetics on the property. So, because I have a nursery, and I have a small nursery business, and so part of it is really like I am propagating all of this stuff for myself and for planting out probably next year, actually. So, along those lines of higher yielding, smaller, dwarfing plantings, essentially higher yielding, higher density. And this will loop back to Northern Nut Growers in a minute, but there are these varieties or crosses that have happened. So like the English oak has a fastigiate form, which is columnar, which means that it can be like, I might have a picture.
In the pollards,
I might-
there's a fastigiata form.
Right, it's
not-
kind of
But the tree that he shows, it's pruned out a little ways, so I've been using fastigiata as the climbable column.
Right,
Versus
so-
the shred, which is just a telephone pole and then brushy.
yeah, exactly. It's kind of the same where, like we were talking about this the other night, where you could fit a lot more pollarded trees. You could fit a higher density of pollarded trees for leaf hay, You know, it's the same thing. I'm just
Right.
going for fruit
Right.
and nuts,
Right.
whereas you're going for leaves.
Right.
And there could be a combination
And
of
the
two.
shreds was like a forest of telephone poles that they cut off everything every 3 years, and they were saw logs.
Right, right. So for me, like, okay, back to English oak.
And they
It has
definitely had a close planting then.
Yeah, and English oak has a form that is columnar. So we're talking like maybe 45 feet tall and 15 feet wide. Like, whoop, you know, and you can bring that height down too, of course. But they produce English oak acorns. However, when that was brought over to the United States as like landscape plantings, the acorns were like really something that people like landowners didn't want, like, you know,
Right,
in
to
their
fall.
hedgerow, in their privacy screens or whatever. But the good thing that
Wake
happened
them
from
up.
this,
You don't
Is-
have pigs there.
yeah,
Pick
right.
them up.
So the acorns is an amazing thing. Like to think about like being able to space a bunch of oak trees, you know, in a space to produce like loads of acorns. But the other thing is when they brought these over to the United States, they started hybridizing with our American white oaks, like bur oak. So there are bur oak crosses, and I don't know if you've seen bur oak acorns, but they're like
Large.
they're large. They're like that big,
Have a lot
you know.
planted, but not
Maybe
very.
bigger than that sometimes. And so there are trees that, you know, that are, because all these are propagated now by seeds. Like nothing is grafted in the landscape horticulture, you know, let's plant a privacy screen. All those nurseries right now are planting from seed. But there's specific cultivars out there that will tell you that it's a known cross. They know that this was bur oak meets English oak or whatever. And so that's where like a fun bit of fruit exploring comes in, is like one of the only aspects I like of
Going
cities.
to places that do landscape
Yes,
plantings.
exactly.
Like when I came home with all the different nuts from, what's the big city in Wisconsin?
Madison?
Madison. Yeah, I wandered the sidewalks of Madison and came home with all this stuff that's now on my woods.
Yeah. And so that's like a really
landscape
fun
plantings.
Right. And you can graft those too. You can graft oaks pretty easily. Just as long as you have white on white or red on red, essentially.
And an English oak is a white oak?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Because
So-
I was there when it was winter, so.
Yeah.
They
So
did have, no, I guess they did have leaves. Yeah, they're funny. Littler leaves, though.
So what I'm doing now, I've got a bunch of seeds that and this is a bit of a breeding thing. I have a bunch of bur oak seedlings that are in pots right now that will get planted out,
And if
Next
anyone
year.
needs some, I still have leftovers
Yeah.
here.
and they
Okay.
are
Chip pile.
and they're rootstocks for me. And I'm going to let them get above deer browse height, and then I'm going to graft on the fastigiate cultivars. So that gives me another couple years to. I've got some that I've like marked
And
with
if
my
you-
GPS.
And if you graft them just a little higher, you can have one set of branches that you can pick from a short, stepping on a bucket,
Yeah.
and then the rest can be gone.
Right. It's true. You can do that. Which would look so funny.
Yeah,
It would look
but-
like a sword. you know.
Or one set of branches that the goats can climb up and
Yeah.
you don't want them to do that.
So I threw this idea out to the internet a couple years ago, I guess, maybe a year ago. And more than that, year and a half ago.
And the columnar form isn't its own. Oh, because you can propagate without waiting for seed from them, of course. Never mind.
Yeah. So I have a few trees that are pinpointed that I'm going to take graft wood off of, you
Right.
know, that have like, that produce prolific amounts of acorns. Like that's a genetic thing too. Like, so back
so
to
there are some bearing, so you could plant those seeds as well.
yes, I can, and I will.
But there's some of them that are better than others for the column.
Mhm.
Okay,
I think
so. That's
so.
why you're
Because
grafting.
I'm looking for like, ones that I've seen have acorns on 2 years in a row.
Right.
Because that's like, so the idea
And
of
you can't always tell whether it's site specific or whether it's a better genetic material.
right, and so the idea of like mass producing species and such has been counteracted to a researcher I talked to about this, like how you'll have like acorns every 3 years or something for certain species.
Mhm.
She said that though there are some correlations for that, and that is genetics, that is fully genetically run, like bearing every 3 years, most are frost tolerant or frost endangered. So when you have a late frost, that's not part of the genetics, you know, that's, a lot of them are annual bearing. And especially a lot of them are annual bearing, it's just that the frost gets them. And so like with chestnuts, you know, who are notoriously annual bearing, that's because their catkins are out in June, you know.
Right, they're hardy.
So
they time themselves well.
Yeah, they're past the threat of frost for almost everywhere. I don't know if you've ever gotten a frost in June. Have you?
We used
Like
to have
a
a
bad
last
one?
frost date of June 15th in South Paris
Yikes.
in the 80s.
Well, anyway.
But it wasn't every year that we got
Yeah.
one.
So,
But often we were in a frost pocket.
so the idea of planting
And
in
it
a
was
way.
the year that everyone got a frost every month in Maine.
That would be a game ender. I would be so stressed
You
out
just-
all the time.
Peas, cabbages, carrots, beets, rutabagas,
No.
apples. No, the apples got messed up, I think.
Yeah. Oh my God. So,
Maybe not.
so yeah, this idea of like paddocks that I can essentially send them in that are mixed too, like, you know, fastigiate oaks, but also like Sandra at Connecticut gave me a bunch of little giant chestnut seeds that come up pretty true to type, and she said they're about 12 feet tall, and they produce, you know, pretty heavily. You can just pack a lot into a space. And then there's fastigiate persimmons. There's fastigiate ginkgos. There's fastigiate. I mean, there's like.
Yeah, go ahead and finish it.
It's just your ability.
There's a
I'm
lot.
just playing with this ability
Right.
to pack more into a smaller space.
Right. Now, for me, I always, like, because I'm making all these different shapes of trees in my woods pockets, but it's always, everything has to have sun hit it. So, I'm not really understanding how you gain that much, whether it's a tall, skinny, the tall, skinny shred is so you can have a saw log out of it later. But as far as the others, whether it's short and wide or tall, the rows need to be further apart to get,
Right.
if it's even rows, but
So that's the maintenance of it. Like.
So, but I'm not getting how it fits more into the same space.
Right. So
I understand,
have you seen a high density apple orchard?
as in, I've seen dwarf apple orchards. That
So
I
no,
used
this
to
is
prune.
this is trellised apples,
Okay, yes,
about 10 feet tall,
okay, yeah,
and so that's essentially, and then the rows are 12 feet wide,
right,
and they get a ton of sun. That's part of the whole thing.
right, but it's low and
It's 12 feet tall, you know, and so
Right.
with these, like, you know,
so it's low and it's,
you can make them low.
Identical.
Like,
12 feet is pretty low.
yeah, I think so. 15 feet is low. If I get a 15 feet by, you know, with 15-foot row spacing, then that's great to me. Or even a 20-foot row spacing.
Right,
Like, because you're getting a lot more within the row too. So.
but you're saying that having more beings versus wider beings that take up the same space or have longer branches with, you know, that you actually get a lot more fruit with more beings.
Yeah,
with
I'm
more
saying
trees.
that. Yes,
Even
in a
though
way.
they're
I'm
still
trying
getting the
to
same
understand.
sun services.
they're
I'm
still
not quite
they're still getting them.
the carriage of the apples is a little different, but it still ends up needing the same amount of space around them to get the sun and the air and everything else.
Yeah, it's just they're smaller trees, you know. So if you
I
think
mean, I get that they're bearing sooner. I get
Yeah.
that part, but I don't get how you're bearing more.
because there's more per acre.
Right, but there's not more sun and dirt and rain and the things that go into those apples.
So if you consider like, okay,
and the
traditional
leaf surface all
traditional
needs
oak
that.
tree planting. So there used to be this, and this is through Northern Nut Growers too, is they used to have people write in about these hog only acorn trees in the South. Like one was called Juicy Hog Biscuit, and it produced like 40 bushels. No. It was like 140 bushels of acorns,
Yeah,
a year.
My neighbor's little tree gave over 400 pounds
and it had a spread
last year.
of 80 feet. You know, like it's huge.
Right.
And so if you think 80 by 80, and so how many trees per acre is 80 by 80? What is 80 times 80? 6,400
Yep.
divided by 43,560. So 6, 12, 18, 36, 40. So
And a half.
like 5.5 trees per acre.
Right.
You know, whereas, and so that's 140 bushels per tree, which is pretty good. It takes time to get to that point.
Right. But then they
Whereas,
live a long time.
and they live a long time.
Right.
Whereas, say you're getting, some of these trees, you'd easily get 5 bushels per tree of acorns, and you've got 150 of them, and so, and that's in year 8, rather than year 18, 15, 16.
Right, so you're saying that's more per acre than even the big tree at its height.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so is it kind of like they're shorter-lived things, they just bear themselves to death?
Kinda.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
So the short-lived comes with self-sacrifice of
Right, and it always does.
making more out
I
of
think.
less.
Yeah, it always does. Precociousness comes at a price, for sure. So that's why I've got the older planting, the larger plantings, because I believe in that.
Right, because they're there for your great-grandchildren.
Right, exactly.
And they don't have to set it up every time.
But it's also really fun to think about, like, moving animals in, and because one of my inspirations is there's a Dan Barber, who's a chef in New York.
Mm-hmm.
He gave a TED talk on this guy he met in Spain who produces all natural foie gras, and the reason he was able to get his geese to just gorge themselves was he created a landscape where they wanted to gorge themselves. They were just like so stoked on everything that they just
Did
ate.
they die of
ate.
their livers bursting like traditional foie gras?
No, they didn't.
So but it's still considered foie gras.
It's considered foie gras, yeah, and
That's
it's
good.
a really
I'm glad that they're not
it's
insisting on that.
it's really amazing, It's ethical foie gras,
Right.
essentially. He cracked the code, and crossing that ethical line. But he also did some things with fencing so they don't feel trapped. There's a wild population that comes in and breeds with them, like they call them the wild population down, to come visit.
Well, they don't have to because this is
they're
such a great spot.
This is where it's at, right? And then he has a breeding
They
fund
like
that
numbers
stays.
anyway. They're safer with numbers.
But in using that idea of creating a space that is so irresistible, that they're just going to gorge.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I want.
Of course, geese, they're made to migrate anyway, so they want to gorge and fatten up as much as possible.
Yeah, and pigs will gorge. Pigs gorge. They're pigs, But that sort of...
pigs are probably gearing for winter.
Yeah, especially guinea
traditionally
hogs.
in their traditions of their heritage.
Right, especially
There
large
were
hogs,
probably
I
lean
think.
times.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
So,
large hogs are even bred for that.
right, because they'll go diabetic, too. Like pre-diabetic. A lot of, ocelots and even American guinea hogs will hit signs of pre-diabetic if they're fed, grains and things, because their body is used to just gorging on, what's around.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and that's only for winter storage, and then they start back up. So,
If you
but the
feed that way
diabetics...
all winter, that's a whole other issue.
Yeah, that diabetes trait is also for keeping fat on a little longer, I think. So that's something and through Northern Echoes, I'm getting all these completely obscure cultivars, to try, and they give me dates that work for them, and it's just a matter of figuring out, I have to be
What's the
okay,
state translation.
when is
other
I'm having to ask
common-
do you have yellow transparent? Do you have what
When
do you
do they
have?
ripen
And,
in-
yeah, exactly.
in
And what
relation?
exactly? Because then I have a point where I can justify all this. But
I need to roll, so I'm gonna go, but I wanna really thank you very much.
you're welcome.
Thank you.
Sorry we didn't get up to words at all, but
Oh, no problem. Have a good day.
Nice.
We're gonna see you tonight, not sure.
okay,
So I'll
maybe.
surprise you. See ya.
Take care. Say hi to your piggies and goat.
Okay.
So yeah, that's I guess in a whole big nutshell. I mean, I'm working with nuts too. One of them is and I like chinkapins a lot.
And I'm not even familiar
Yeah.
with what a chinkapin. Do you have pictures
I have
of a
pictures.
chinkapin or
So
do they grow in New Jersey?
mhm,
Because I don't know them.
they do.
But
They
they might
grow-
not have been bearing weight by me when I was growing up.
I know some people in New York who are not New York.
I mean, I know they can grow here and they can grow in, but I'm wondering, are they through the woods the way the hickories are? Because I grew up with the
No.
hickories.
And they're more
And the chest- and
mostly
the black
they're an
walnut.
edge species. All right, so that's a chinkapin nut. That's a handful of normal sized chinkapin nuts. Okay, so the thing about this is really close relative to the American chestnut. The nut itself
It's a
tastes
lot
like American
chestnutty.
chestnut, and it's a thin shell, so it's all the bonuses of chestnut. It's just smaller. However, I tracked down the work of, because I'm like a full-fledged addicted fruit explorer.
So they're smaller than American chestnut?
They're smaller than American
'Cause
chestnut,
I don't think
and
most-
they only bear
That
one.
didn't look a lot smaller than most
They're not
American
much.
chestnuts.
They're not much.
A
but
little bit.
They only bear one. The big thing is they bear one nut per
Oh.
haul.
Yeah, and the chestnuts definitely have.
And they only grow in the southeastern U.S. It says.
Well, that's not
Wild.
totally
Grow
true.
wild
Wild.
there. Black walnuts don't grow
I know
wild
Eric
either,
Evans
but
has-
there's old ones around.
Eric Evans has chinkapins at his house.
Right.
I've seen
And he's
them.
coming tonight.
I've eaten them. Okay, so yeah, there's that picture again. So just
Yeah, they are smaller.
they're smaller.
Definitely smaller.
But here is
Only one per husk.
yeah, generally. Though
Is that called? What is that husk called officially? Anything?
I can't think of it right now.
Okay.
If any of you can hold on, and let me find the comparison to this dude's work. His name is Ozaville Jackson. He died years ago. Improved chinkapin, there it is. And this is what I found when I tracked down the remnants of his orchard. So that's what was in my hand, and this is what he bred.
Good job.
This is a huge improvement, this is a big deal.
That's why Eric Evans is coming tonight, because I emailed him that Eliza told me
I sent
she
him,
wanted him.
this picture.
Okay, yeah, that's why he's coming tonight. She told me that she wanted him here.
Yeah.
He only lives in Camden. He's a friend of mine. He's helped me. He's been my helped with certain grant proposals about leaf fodder, actually.
Yeah.
And he's a scientist, except he's with the American Chestnut Society, so he's not a high-grade scientist, I guess.
No, he's super passionate and a really nice guy.
And he's a folk dancer, so I know him from there.
Yeah.
Be careful. But anyway, he's coming because of that.
Yeah. And so, and this has been
kids are little at his house
right. And so this has been
in Camden.
in trying to figure out what he did. It's almost impossible for me because this man died 5 years ago. He wrote a few articles.
Just missed him.
I know. And this orchard is like 30 minutes from where I grew up. I mean, it's like
It's
no!
like, shit!
I could have been his apprentice.
You just have to get a seance going.
I know. And so I trespassed on his property a couple times, and that's where I got this. But I took wood off this year, and I grafted some, and I have a lot of them that took. But it's
Which is the whole thing. Grafting nut trees.
grafting nut trees is a thing. Yeah,
Like,
that's
it's
what
more
I do.
trouble than.
Well, oaks and chestnuts are easy.
Okay.
It's when you get into the juggling
Right.
family
With all that
that
sappy sap.
all that sap is really hard. I mean,
Okay.
it's doable. You just got to cut vents for sap to leave, and there's
Interesting extra things to do.
there's extra things because it'll blow
Okay,
out.
but these are just straight grafting.
These are straight grafting. They
Do
grow.
you
They
bud
can
graft or spring graft?
winter graft these.
Yeah.
I'm gonna try and do
As
some
in
bud.
spring grafting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I actually did spring graft.
Dormant wood.
Dormant wood. But
What's wood?
I forced the root
Wood is
stocks out of dormancy so I could bark graft them. Which is, I can go over that later if people want to know.
I think, well, some of us already know.
But this is part of the
grafters?
whole like feedlot thing
Are you
too.
grafters? Okay.
Yeah.
Is this is a small tree?
Well, maybe only I know.
Like this is a very small tree, if not bush. You can prune it to be a tree, or you can let it be a bush.
Kind of like my hazelnuts.
Yeah, it's to me it's the
Similar.
same. It's like hazelnut size.
Okay.
Just maybe not a coppice kind of thing because these are grafts. Grafted
But
trees. So.
hazelnuts aren't always either, depending on what people do.
Right.
And some hazelnuts tend toward a tree form,
Yeah.
but still a smaller tree.
And I've seen huge chinkapins too, like 25 or 30 feet tall,
Mhm.
big. But they're pretty
Like a
manageable.
juneberry.
Yeah.
Saskatoon.
Yeah.
Soldierberry.
And so anyway, I have a feeling this was crossed with a Chinese chestnut. I have a feeling, but the leaves don't reveal it.
Mhm.
The only reason I think that is because on his farm, which he didn't live in, he just had this get away with like an Airstream trailer.
Are they still one per husk?
Yeah. Though there's a guy on Northern Nut Grows who's breeding chinkapins from a completely different genetic
Just
strain.
because Chinese chestnuts consistently are 4 from my childhood.
Right. So there's a guy on Northern Nut Grows who's getting 3 per husk.
Mhm.
So
And
anyway,
you wonder if he crossed with them.
yeah, it has to be like American or Chinese or European or something in there.
How many are usually in the American?
I think it's 3.
Okay.
I think most of them are 3. Only you
Okay.
get
I
the
thought there were 4.
yeah,
The one,
you get occasional
the one that has
4s.
nothing in it.
So, yeah. So this is also something you can plant. This is also pretty shade tolerant. So that's another thing that I like. I'm planning on planting these in my older orchards too. So when the canopy closes in, more so they'll be okay.
But like hazels are tolerant, but they don't bear that much when they're in the understory.
Yeah, these do pretty good. I've seen. Here, I'll show you one. Actually, let me see if I got it. I don't know if I pulled it out. I have the folder here.
I'm gonna need to move pretty soon. I'm starting to
Yeah.
stale here. But it is about lunch anyway.
Right. Chinkapin. I have a whole folder on chinkapin. I just gotta find it. Oh, there you go. Oh, so
what are the advantages of a chinkapin over, say, a Chinese chestnut or an American chestnut for us here?
well, I think that
Like, why is there?
they're more disease
Excited.
they're more disease resistant than American chestnuts. And they
Right.
taste like American chestnuts.
Okay.
That's
So
what
they taste better than a Chinese.
You can eat them raw, more whereas Chinese have a higher starch content until
Right.
you cook them.
Which I knew very
They're
much
they're
from
tastier,
eating
really,
them on my school ground.
and they're not they're bigger than hazelnuts
Mhm.
generally, or at least this one most certainly is.
Right, but they're not as oily as like a hazelnut. It's a different thing.
No, it's
More of a
different.
chestnutty thing.
Yeah, it's
More
a
like an American chestnut.
It's a flower.
Awesome.
It can be a flower or whatever. So yeah, but also they just spit out their nuts, and it's great for animals too. Like
And they
I would-
spit out their nuts as in they come out of the husks easily.
yeah,
Awesome.
yeah,
So this
easily.
one's in your hand. Just
No,
for,
they
like, what
just-
you picked up on the ground.
Right, they just open up and everything drops out.
Nice.
And so for
Whereas
me,
the chestnuts, the whole thing falls, and you got to get it out of the spiny thing.
right, not the case. Usually the whole stays on the tree.
Wow.
And drops it.
That is nice.
And so, and they're usually around mid-September that they do this across the boards, wherever I am. Like I've been to zone 5B, and seen wild chestnuts, like in Appalachia.
Wow.
Wild
Chinkapins.
chinkapins, and they're the same time as these are.
Mhm. So
but-
when did you say again?
What'd you say?
When did you say they bear again?
Mid-September, pretty much. And
Right in bear season.
yeah, and like thinking about turkeys, thinking about like there's a lot of it's a really, I mean, you think there's all this thing about chestnut raised Iberico hogs are just like acorn raised hogs, and like Mark Shepard's chestnut raised hogs, but this is like way easier to me for hogs or for any animal really, and it doesn't take up any space, and you can put it in a spot that might be more shade tolerant.
When I came here, I planted American hazels, kind of like where they would be under apple trees, and then realized that they stay the same height as the apple trees for so long. Like, they're really bigger than I expected, especially when they're somewhere that they're going to bear a lot, like on a chicken manure pile.
Yeah, so here's a picture of, this is what,
So they're an understory, but they're a tall understory,
yeah, and they just open up, and that drops right on out.
but just one in each. But
And you can
it's
see
not so bad one
yeah.
in each when, I mean, as far as quantity of yield, maybe that affects it, but it doesn't matter so much one of each if you don't have to pry the thing open.
Right. And some of his in that orchard that I trespass in often, because I can't find who to talk to.
Right.
It's for sale, which is another
And
reason
did you
why
look
I've
at
been...
the town I mean, usually here I go to the town to find out who the landowner is.
I haven't gone to Deltaville's town office yet.
Yeah.
Do
So,
you know how
figure
much
it out.
land is for sale for?
do they all
Like
look at once?
260,000, I think. It's super floods prone. I would never buy it. It's like
darn.
um,
Do they drop all at once or do they trickle?
They will drop probably over a 2-week window.
Okay.
And there's some though on his farm that like the husks never opened up, but he didn't select for. You can tell because he's got the bigger trees, middle-sized trees, and then his new planting that happened like 10 years ago.
And those are what he selected.
And that's what he selected. So it's so awesome to go
Wow.
back into his bigger trees and see all these genetics he didn't select for, and then look. And so in the bigger trees, he had some that never opened up, you know, and which actually was really a big help for collecting seed because it wasn't dried
Because
out.
the squirrels don't get them either.
Yeah, the squirrels didn't get them either. It was all mine, you know.
Right, because the Chestnut Society puts little bags around.
Yeah, and he
Little
had
mesh bags.
some in his middle planting that were so prolific. I mean, it was just like burrs lining the entire stem, you know.
Kind of like those cherries we picked. Oh,
Yeah,
this one.
and so I just need to go. I need to really get some permission and go in there and spend a lot of time, you know, taking those genetics and saving them where I am. But all this takes time and money. So, but it's important. And so I'm going to probably apply for a grant of some sort to do it through the Northern Nut Growers. And that's, I mean, really, I'm like such a nerdy fruit explorer. Like, I live in the place in the same town as J. Russell Smith used to live, and so you just like walk.
Who was like one of the founders of the
of tree crops.
Society.
Yeah, of like agroforestry, really. You know, if
Okay.
you think about it, like, you know, he was proselytizing like getting rid of annual agriculture and planting trees and running animals in them, and you know,
He was
so
the Mark Shepard of his day, only more so. And
way
better,
more.
better grounded,
Yeah,
more researched.
yeah, in every way. You know.
Mm-hmm.
And he's also a Quaker, so he was tapped into the Quaker network of other amazing horticulturalists. So I guess right now I'll just show you, real quick, like just crazy pictures of grafted fruit trees that I've saved. So this is probably the oldest persimmon in America. Yeah, oldest grafted persimmon in America. This predates J. Russell Smith. It was his mentor.
Sorry, climb right over me.
Yeah, and so persimmons are very slow growing, and so this is like you're looking at it at least 180 years old. This is probably the first cultivar ever, because the early golden was discovered in early golden was the first persimmon cultivar, and that was discovered after the Civil War, and this one we tree ringed it, and the middle is kind of hollow, but we got 100. We counted 180, and there's still ways to go.
Who's this?
This is Pete. Pete is my former boyfriend meets fruit explorer.
Is that the one that I met?
Yeah, that's the one you
I guess I never saw him grin.
So he's not a sour guy.
That's good.
He just doesn't want to farm. So this is a Carpathian. You won't see the.
I can see how that wouldn't work.
Yeah, you can see here that.
I remember that.
This isn't a grafted tree, but this is definitely a J. Russell Smith thing, because this is a Carpathian walnut. And there's a bunch of Carpathian walnuts around this. This was an old Quaker homestead that is producing like abundant amounts of Carpathian walnuts still, which is kind of weird for our area. So I'm saying I got that one.
And it's weird in what way?
Because it's just not, it's never been like suited for where we are. Really.
What does it need that it's not there?
It needs less humidity. It just seems to, you know, that
More of a northern thing?
Hmm?
More of a northern thing, or just a drier?
It's more of a
climate thing?
northern thing, yeah.
Yeah.
And drier.
Yep.
This is one of the many trees.
With a
This-
grafting mistake. Or
Grafted. Well, this is
mismatch.
this is northern pecan on a hickory rootstock.
Mm-hmm.
Hickory is less vigorous than northern pecan, so you should always graft the opposite if you can. Graft hickory to northern pecan, or just let your northern pecan on northern pecan. But there's a lot of this, and that all these are cultivars. We just don't know what they are because they're old and all that information is lost. This is an old pear. That's the graft mark there. This is Yardley Taylor's place, who was J. Russell Smith's mentor, who also lives down the street. This pear is super old. It doesn't
So
have a
you're
name.
just taking pictures of the trunks for us.
Yeah, I know. Well, it's the winter time too. I've got fruit too, but I just never. Fruit season is so insane that.
Alex in the canopy.
No time for pictures.
There's a canopy.
There you go. So these two This is an old planting of Hicks everbearing mulberry, which is probably what I'm most excited about of everything I've gotten over the last few years.
Which may not make it here.
May not. I don't know if it probably will survive and live here, but I don't think it will bear for as long as it does for. In the deep south, it'll bear for 4 straight months.
Hicks everbearing, did you?
Hicks everbearing, and it's
Yeah.
prolific. Like there's Illinois everbearing, and Hicks bears maybe double to triple the amount Illinois everbearing does for as long of a time.
Do either of you have a favorite mulberry for up here? Because I know Seth said he's never gotten them.
I have a favorite mulberry tree.
That you on your property?
No.
Oh, okay.
No. But can I think of her name? She works at Rennie's, and the tree's in Appleton, and I pruned it, and it's huge and wide, many trunks, and it just, she says it just bears really well and everything else, and I just love that tree. It's huge, and that's why my named mulberry is named after that tree, because that was the year I pruned that tree.
Oh, wow, okay.
After it had broken quite a bit.
Yep.
Wood is so yellow.
Yeah,
But anyway, I can
it's a white.
point you
it's
at
really
that tree, and
mulberry.
we can get her to save us at least some seed material,
Yeah.
let alone grafting.
Yeah,
That would be
and,
cool.
and grafting is pretty easy with mulberries
Yes.
too.
Yeah, grafting.
So,
as well.
this is an interesting place
I have 2
because
from Mo here.
these
I don't
trees
know what
are-
they are. They're seed-
Yeah.
these trees were on
They're
40 by
seedlings.
40
They're
spacing.
seedlings.
Cool.
This was
They're
a
seedlings.
Yeah.
It's a favorite too.
this was a historic orchard for hogs. Like in the south,
cool.
those exist. This is like the last one I know of. These trees are 250 years old, but they're not 250 years old. Sorry, they're 1850 is when they were planted, and so you have
So what's that make them?
167. Yeah.
Yeah.
Still, it's pretty good
Fast.
for a mulberry because, and Sean and I were talking about this a couple days ago. Is that they've been hurricane pollarded, and that's probably
And
why,
that's
they're so old. Is because the hurricanes just keep because this is in coastal North Carolina.
Rejuvenating them.
They keep knocking the the chops out.
And mulberries are good for that because they're brittle. Really
Yeah,
brittle.
and so they're on
Kinda
40 by
willow 'em.
they're planted 40 by 40 spacing, and the records I have show that at year 8, these mulberry at 8 years old, this mulberry tree, one mulberry tree would produce a half a bushel of mulberries a day.
And you're not saying
For
this
3
particular planting,
but
someone's research on
Yeah,
this variety.
like farmers writing in
Okay.
about this. A half a bushel a day for 3 straight months. One tree. And then, or 4
And how
straight
wide?
months.
For what
For-
spacing?
40 by 40. These are 40 by 40, which is
Okay.
generally what they were on.
Okay.
And then and that just gets higher and higher and higher. By year 20, you're at like 2.5 bushels per day. And so they're saying, I have this, oh, here we go.
So at their peak, they're
Yeah, so
2.5
we've talked this
bushels per
matter
day.
over thoroughly here in the office and believe that one mulberry tree 10 years old ought to support a pig 4 to 6 months old during the tree's fruit season. At the tree gets older, 15 to 20 years, it would support 2 or 3 pigs at the same age mentioned above. And that's one farmer. But then the next one,
Well, it depends on their soil too, of course, and lots of
right, and this
weather
is
that
this
year
is
and
sandy
everything else.
soil, North Carolina, where they're talking about this. So anyway, yeah, like
It's a chat.
15 hogs. So
15 hogs for one tree
yeah, for a season.
for
But
For
it says
the-
it's like a 100-year-old tree.
Yeah, right. So that's what I'm planning out in the big orchards, of like, because we know that this thing is
long-term.
prolific. Like, it bears shit tons of mulberries every day for months, And that's something that, like, I don't really want to move back to Maine because I really want to mess with this mulberry, kind of
Oh,
thing.
we're getting where we
Right.
have more and more mulberries that are making it here for longer.
I know. So I'm excited about this.
But
And,
her mulberry is pretty big and loaded, I'll tell you.
and in the
Over there.
and also in
Someone
this
planted a while ago.
planting it,
I think
the
it's
only
like
thing that
100.
saved this was this pine plantation. Luckily, they did not cut down the mulberry trees when they planted this pine plantation. But throughout
How
is
is the
also
pine saving it.
it's just because they didn't tear. There's a peanut field right here, and so they just like I guess they
It
just.
was near where they were. It was near the edge of the field, in other words.
But also
So they
within
could
this
bear
is a
some
persimmon planting too, which is really interesting because that's the other side you hear is in the South anyway, they had pigs on mulberries for 3 or 4 months, and then that would switch over to persimmons. And then they
Right, so that's why you
slaughter.
were saying it was made for pigs there.
Yeah, it is. There was that planting happened for pigs and chickens,
Yeah.
and nothing else. That's a hikan,
Much as you can
That's a
leave
quarter,
persimmon for a
and
pig.
that's the
Whoa.
hikan nut. So that's stuff I'm finding, a la J. Russell Smith's, backyard essentially. So this is something else. Like it's full of meat. It's a big nut.
But it's not like a watermelon. That's a little bit of a camera effect.
No, that's a quarter. That's for
Oh, that's
scale.
a quarter. Yeah, okay. A quarter. I didn't know what you. I thought
Yeah.
you meant a quarter of the nut, or I didn't.
No,
know what you
no,
meant.
that's like a
Money.
little
It's
quarter.
money.
That's money quarter
Yeah.
meats, and they're
Yeah.
the same.
What
You're
I'm
wearing
saying
the
is from
exact
back here, it
same
looks like
shirt.
you're holding up a big watermelon.
I am. I
That's a
don't
quarter,
change. No, I have a different undershirt. I just always have this vest on when I travel.
That's nice.
Oh, this is in France. That's oaks. Those are grafted oaks. Which they graft for a reason. This
Because they had really good acorns.
That's right. Huge acorn drop.
And or sweet acorns too. Because some places, I definitely just read something somewhere that has particularly sweet acorns
And
in there.
then I guess that's about it for my slideshow. I've got.
And their
I could
traditional
dig
silver
through.
pasture.
Oh, here's just like crazy. That's a northern pecan or a northern pecan,
There's a northern pecan. There was at
which I think have potential here. I've seen them in
in West
Vermont.
Paris.
Yeah, I think they're totally doable here,
It was
and I
old.
would do it.
It was a big old tree that bore well.
Yeah, I would take cuttings, or I'd take
That was the
nuts
one
off of it.
that Montmorency? Is it Montmorency? What's St. Lawrence Nursery?
Oh yeah,
What's his name?
Bill McKinley.
McKinley. So Dwayne, my ex-partner, told him about it, and then went to get some nuts the next fall because he always got some nuts there, and Bill had come and bought the whole crop, so we didn't get any more
That makes sense.
after we told him
Bill
about
locked
them.
that down. Yeah,
Yeah.
and then this is
rude. Considered
a
quite rude,
for
so
real
Dwayne
250-year-old
won't buy any trees off of him after
black
that.
walnut grafted. So this was like right. Yeah, this is like
So Bill at
This
least
is
might have
crazy.
spread them around, is what I'm saying.
right.
I mean, it was very rude, and you should have talked to Dwayne if he.
You
just said
should
he wanted
you should
any.
write Bill. He writes
I don't
back.
have any room to plant anything. I'm not doing this.
I know. Yeah, I'm not. I can't. I've got enough genetics right now as
I'm
it
working
is.
with my native trees in the woods.
And then one more
And up
picture
there,
I'll show
right.
you is this is off of that huge grafted persimmon. So I showed this picture to Jerry Lamon, who's like the persimmon expert in the United States, essentially. And he was like, "Where was this?" And I was like, "Oh, this is like in my backyard, basically." He was like, "Okay, I just got to tell you I'm really excited about this, and I'll tell you why." And he said, the carpels here, 4, 5, 6 of them, is completely unknown. And I've since sent this to 2 other persimmon experts in different areas, who also have been like, "Oh my God." So this, normally it's 4, like this, or even sometimes 5, which I found. This one is 5 years, like, that's also super rare. But it happens, but never 6. And so that means that there's 12 seed sacs. So there's 2 per carpel. This tells you how many seed sacs there are.
Mhm.
And he said that if this was fully pollinated, you'd have an American persimmon. This is 100% American persimmon. That was a 3-inch in diameter persimmon.
So the number of
if fully-
seed sacs affects the size.
Yeah. He's like, it'd have seeds in it, but still, you've got like a fair winner, of like the largest American persimmon ever found, sort of thing. And so that's why it was grafted. I mean, it's got to be,
Right.
It took me
And
finding this
in your
85-year-old
backyard,
man
and
to
you
tell
think
me about
that's-
it. Yeah.
Is that J. Russell Smith as well, do you think?
I think this is his predecessor. The person that, his name is Yardley Taylor, and I know they were in the same Quaker meeting.
Right? They're talking to each other.
He was like
One
an
of
old
his
man.
mentors.
Yeah, he was an old man when J. Russell Smith was coming up, and I know that's the case. Like, because he had these extensive orchards and nurseries, and yeah.
But the persimmon that makes up, so there's meter persimmons, and then there's whatever Mo's got up there.
Probably Proc. That's my guess.
And but like persimmons in general don't make it up here. It's certain ones make it up here.
Yeah, certain ones that are like
So we
cold
can't just like
tolerant.
take that up here.
You could try.
We could try.
Yeah. But
So can we?
I'll send. Yeah, for sure. I'll send you seeds this year if
You
you
probably
want.
should send it to Mo. He has more field than me.
Right. Though I
So
think
would you do it from seeds or would you just graft it?
I grafted them. Grafting
Yeah.
persimmons is hard.
Really?
It needs heat, and so
Even bud grafting.
yeah, you gotta wait until you gotta like wrap it in aluminum foil, you know, and give it like a lot of heat. So I haven't figured out a way to field graft. And also the
Giving it a lot of heat and how? Are you
like
doing that?
I wrap aluminum foil around it and make sure it
But
gets
where's
tons
the
of
tree
sun.
when you're doing that? The little tree
Yeah,
in
it's
your house.
no, it's usually in the field.
Oh,
But
you do
it's
field
also like
grafting.
a
I thought you said
30%
you
take
didn't.
rate no matter what due to
Right.
American incompatibilities. So, like, they're so wild, essentially, that the rootstocks are not, they'll reject other rootstock. Other of the same, same species, but they'll reject it.
Like even if you make a seedling of the one that you're going to graft, and then graft onto that.
Your
seedling.
chances are way better that way.
Okay,
Yeah.
so that's a good.
And that's how it
plan.
goes for nuts, too, across the boards.
If they're very
Like-
close relatives, you're more likely to have it take. And so you are field grafting, but then you're wrapping aluminum, and so it's getting the sun.
Yeah, because I have
First, thought
I
you
have
said
wild
you weren't.
persimmons growing everywhere.
Right.
Like I said, I have that other orchard that's like half an acre of Asian persimmons, but there's a lot of rootstock that came up over the years of
Right, just like we are with apples here. There's apples all.
right.
If anyone needs apple seedlings, the whole place that I had my pigs for the oaks over there, under a total closed canopy, is completely apple seedlings that are not going to do anything because they're in the total closed canopy. But it's like every poop has like apple seedlings coming out of it.
So
So
yeah.
that's like everywhere my animals have been. There's apple seedlings.
So there you go. I hope you don't feel overwhelmed. But if you do,
So we're gonna have lunch.
That was
So.
awesome.
Awesome.
yay! All right.
You cover everything you wanted to, like.
I think so.